So it is Monday, May 13th, 2024, and I'll call to order a budget information meeting, which is a chance for our various city departments to present early on to the city council where budget preparations are at this moment in time. I've never led one of these, so we're just going with it, and let me know if you have any questions and what else I should be saying at various points. But this is an opportunity for city councilors largely to be both here in person or online, or to watch later about each of these departments. So each department has prepared their fiscal year 25 budget presentation. I think in general, we'll do about a 10-minute or so presentation, and then we'll take, right, I guess so, yes, they looked about 10 minutes in terms of presentation, 10 to 15 minutes or so, and then we'll take questions from any city councilor. And I'll try to keep an eye on time today. Tonight, we're going to be reviewing the airport budget and Burlington Electric Department budget, as well as getting a general fund budget update on fiscal year 25 by the CAO. And then finally, the budget for the non-department aspect of our budget. That's a lot of budgets. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to our first presentation. Our director of the airport, would you introduce your team? Oh,
Question.
yeah.
I thought I saw a public forum on the agenda, my mistake.
For this meeting, do we traditionally have public forum? We do?
It was listed on the agenda.
Okay, so we should certainly do it. I apologize, I didn't have the agenda for this in front of me, so thank you very much. So I just jumped ahead. I love public forum, so I apologize. Would you like to address us with public forum?
I would.
Okay. Why don't you please come to the table and introduce yourself, and then I'll see if there's other folks in person for public comment, and then we'll go on to online if there's anyone online. I apologize for that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I'm Nick Persampieri. I'm a resident and property owner in Ward 3, and I wanted to make some brief comments about the slides that Burlington Electric has presented in support of its budget. The slides mention on pages 3 and 14 the fact that revenues from sale of renewable energy certificates are expected to decline due to decline in production. And the McNeil plant's financial viability is heavily dependent on the sale of renewable energy certificates. They sell them into what's called the Connecticut Class 1 market. And I just wanted to mention that I don't think that the slides, while they may be technically accurate, I don't think they present a full picture of what's going on. They don't indicate that production is going down because it's not economic to run the plant most of the year due to the relatively low price of natural gas. So for that reason, while the plant normally runs full tilt during the winter, this past December, it only operated 48% of the time, and only 70% of the time in February, a little over 80% in January. In addition, they say that revenues are going down because production is going down because it's not economic to run the plant. And also they don't mention that starting in August of 2025, the value that they receive for the RECs from Connecticut is going to be cut in half. I think. And so the plant appears to be losing money. As of September 30th, 2023, it had a calendar year-to-date net loss of 4.7 million. With the REC sales declining and the price of natural gas expected to remain low for many years, the prospects of the plant being profitable anytime within the next several years are not good. Finally, I just wanted to mention that I note that the budget provide some funding for some studies for wood dry or a third-party study on forestry and another study. Before we spend money on studies, ought to be addressing seriously the question of whether we should be continuing to operate the plant at all. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thank you. Is there anyone else in the room who would like to address us on the public comment? Seeing no one in the room, we'll go online. Okay, so we'll go in the order that I think the hands were raised. So first we'll go with former Councilor Sharon Busher, and then to be followed by Ashley Adamson. Since we have a handful of folks, I am going to start to give about 2 minutes or so, and I'll have you wrap up your comments around 2 minutes. Go ahead, Sharon. Can't hear you, Sharon, if you're trying to speak. You're on mute.
Is that better?
That's a lot better. Hi.
Sorry, I didn't realize that. I apologize. First of all, I want to thank both for all the presenters for the slides in advance. I'm going to just make my statements about the airport and BED. So I'm hoping that these questions will be answered during the presentation, but the airport is projecting an increase in the number of scheduled seats and the number of passengers, and yet the charts that they showed that there was a decrease in the number of scheduled seats in 2024 in comparison to 2022 and 2023, and there was a decrease in the number of passengers in comparison to 2023. So I just wanted to understand that. The second piece is for the airport is as far as the local share for grants, it says that the state portion is underfunded, and I wasn't quite sure if that was being addressed or how that could be addressed. So those are the questions that I had, and hopefully those will be discussed and answered. For Burlington Electric, the slides that I saw, one slide was, what are the controllable expenses? And those are expenses that are not related to the purchase of power. I didn't really see any on the slide I had, so I'm hoping that there'll be a fill in the blank there for me. And then on slide 20, there was a rate comparison, and it showed something happened in 2021 which caused those rates to increase, and I wondered if they would be hopefully answering what caused that trigger. And the last thing is, thank you all so much. When there are graphs or charts, it would be really good if there were sometimes a few bullets to go along with them to explain. I know that the presentation hopefully will fill in what was missing because I had a hard time following some of those, but thanks again.
Thanks, Sharon. Ashley Adams, you're up next. In about 2 minutes, I'll give you the sign, okay? Go ahead, Ashley. You are on mute again if you were trying to come up.
Sorry about that. Oh my gosh.
Go ahead, Ashley.
Thank you so much for taking my comment. I'm here because I'm really concerned to see money in the budget for further investments in the McNeil plant. We already know that the plant needs to shut down for environmental reasons. If you attended the McNeil Biomass Symposium last June, hosted by the TUC, you'll remember that burning wood emits more carbon dioxide than any fossil fuel, including coal. And just like any carbon-intensive combustion, burning trees contributes immediate, irreversible harm through climate pollution. And unlike any other fuel source, it also eliminates the very trees that we rely on to sequester carbon from all sources. Removing trees also reduces biodiversity by destroying habitat, a problem no less consequential for our species than the climate emergency. And don't forget that when we cut down trees, we reduce our resilience in the face of catastrophic floods. In my opinion, there should be not a single dollar additional investment in this plant. The McNeil plant is on life support. It's propped up by RECs and by ratepayers, and it's still losing money. The only investment I see that should be made in the plant is the decommissioning process, period. Instead, I see there's money budgeted for a chip dryer. I don't know how much. I don't see a budget here. I see a series of slides, and there's mention on slide 8 of this wood chip dryer, but I don't see how much has been budgeted for that. I don't know if there's an actual budget provided to you all. I hope so, but I don't see it. I couldn't find that information. I do see $25,000 for a forestry study, which in my opinion is really a red herring. It's something that unfortunately Burlington Electric would like the public to think that if the wood chips they source are obtained through sustainable forestry practices, that the environmental problems are no longer a concern. And it just, it's certainly not the case. The scientific literature will tell you otherwise. We just should not be sinking more of our hard-earned dollars into a plant that is uneconomic to run, and it's doing irreversible damage to the environment. And as a ratepayer, I really hope that you all will keep that in mind. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ashley. Up next is Pike Porter, and I think that's the last person who'd like to address this in public comment. Unless you're online and would like to still speak, then please raise your hand so I can get you in the queue. With that, Pike, go ahead.
I think I'm unmuted now. Is that correct?
Yeah, here you are. Thank you.
Yeah, so I won't speak long. I sent some of you an email earlier today because natural gas prices are expected to remain relatively low for the next 6 to 7 years. McNeil is probably going to lose money for the next 6 to 7 years. Given its age, the owners will need to invest millions of dollars in turbine repairs, et cetera, et cetera. Now is the time to start the decommissioning plan, which is going to take at a minimum 4 years. So in any budget that you see, and I'd like to reiterate that, the slides only are propaganda and happy faces, and we don't really see a budget there. But any budget should include the process of beginning to decommission the McNeil plant. Thank you.
Thank you, Pike. Anyone else online like to address us in public comment? Not seeing any hands. Anyone else in the room? Last call. Okay, well now I've learned that public forum is part of these, so that's good to know. So I really appreciate that. First time for everything. All right, so we are going to close public forum and move on now to our first presentation by the airport. And so with that, Director Longo, if you would introduce your folks again, and then take it from here.
Excellent. Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, why don't we go around the room, starting with Larry?
Larry Lackey, Director of Planning, Engineering and Sustainability.
Hi, Marie Friedman. I am the Director of Finance at the airport. I've been in that position, in that role, since 2015. Before that, I've been with the city for 30 years. So,
Great. Dave Carmen, Deputy Director of Aviation Operations. Been at the airport for over 11 years. Been in my role for about a little bit over 2 years.
I'm the Executive Assistant.
Jeff Bartley, Director of Innovation and Marketing, and whatever else Nick wants to do.
And my name is Nick Longo. I'm the Director of Aviation for the Patrick Leahy Burlington International Airport. Thank you, councilors. I think they're all. And thank you, Mayor, for your support and your staff support on helping us produce our next fiscal year budget. I wanted to give just a very quick, broad overview of who we are at Leahy PTV. And a lot of times when we think about the airport, we think about just our concourses, just our terminal apron and our commercial operations. And while that's a vital part and a vital component to the airport, you have all of these other initiatives and programs and tenants and leaseholders and land that we manage, which is currently around 900 acres. We have a lot of support from the federal government, both from the Federal Aviation Administration side as well as the Department of Homeland Security, Customs and Border Patrol, USDA, the Department of Defense, and locally at the airport, our FAA air traffic controllers, all the way to partnerships with the state, and how we fit within our region from a marketing, from a destination location to highlight our amazing city of Burlington. We are entirely located within the city of South Burlington, and we permit through them, we work with them, we work with their city council, and our airport commission is now made up of 5 City of Burlington as well as 1 South Burlington member and a Winooski member. And then, of course, kind of what I started with, which is all of our partnerships that we have at the airport, a significant amount being right there at the terminal, our car rental companies, our parking garage entities, which Marie is going to highlight significantly as part of our revenue budget, as well as off concourse or off terminal sites like Heritage Aviation and Beta Technologies and Aerodyne and Pratt & Whitney. So all of these things come together to really produce the ecosystem that we have at the airport. Our airline partners, though, are truly how we operate, how we work together, and how we contract with a significant amount of our rates and charges, which is really negotiated with these airlines right here. We have the 3 legacy carriers, we call them, in the United States: American Airlines, Delta, and United. And Sun Country came to the airport a few years ago, and this will be their 3rd year with us. And then Breeze Airways just started just this past January 31st, and we're about to start 2 new flights with them in just a couple of weeks. There's where we fly. The reason this pie chart is so important to us, especially within a small region like New England, is the competition. Seeing that healthy array of different airlines, some flying to the same destination, is incredibly important to not only our passengers and competitive rates for airline ticket prices, but also a healthy market for us when we talk about rates and charges. Some of the highlights that we're going to be talking about today, specific to our fiscal budget, is the recovery of passengers. A lot of times our benchmark for Lakey BTV is 2019. We just passed 705,000 outbound passengers alone. So times 2 is how many passengers come into the airport, about 1.4 million people annually. We're almost at that 2019 number, and in the next couple slides, we're going to go through that. And I really appreciate former Councilor Busher's questions in there, because it really does set the tone for how we're growing, how we're recovering from 2019. Airlines are growing, which means our non-aeronautical revenue is what we call it, or our non-airline revenue is also growing. Our operations are growing, a landing and a takeoff. We count each one of those and how much each one weighs at our airport. A significant user fee at the airport is per 1,000 pounds of landing weight across the board. And when we look at that graph on the right, we see not only are we growing, not only do we have a significant amount of operations, we are now the 2nd busiest airport in New England that has commercial service outside of Boston located. That's how busy we are out on the airfield. That's operations, not passengers, but number of operations, which is a part of our revenue budget. And then to top it all off, we have an amazing team with Larry and all of us here that are managing a significant amount of capital projects. This is outside of our operating and maintenance budget, but it is a significant component of our time that we spend at the airport. This list, just with these 5 bullet points here, it's about $80 million, and that's going to be built in the next 2 years. We have even more beyond that, and we have a healthy, very aggressive capital program over the next 10 years, and that's why the partnership with the Federal Aviation Administration is so important. That dollar from the FAA comes from our methodology and calculation based on our passengers. So again, this key metrics for us of tracking not only seats, but of course the passengers that occupy those seats is crucial to our operation, our forecast, and of course, subsequent budgets in future years, including FY 2025. What you see here is you see some raw data on the left-hand side here of how many seats were either scheduled or are about to be scheduled for the remaining part of 2024. You can see the light blue line that eventually goes into a dashed line is our projected number of seats being scheduled at the airport. It's a bit tough to see with the side piece there, but that dashed line you can see far exceeds all past years, except for 2008. 2008 was our highest number, just over 1 million seats scheduled during that year. I want to point out a couple of things on this slide though. 2008, our average number of seats per plane was 69 seats per plane. Today, our average number of seats per plane is 91 per flight, which means the planes are getting bigger, they're getting heavier, they're getting more efficient, and that means we also charge them per 1,000 pounds, which is also a good thing for our revenue accounts. When we look at 2008 and the number of seats, over 1 million seats scheduled, they were only occupied at an average on that particular year, 75% of the 1 million seats were occupied, which was the largest year in the history of the airport, which is 750,000 passengers that particular year. 2023, we ended the year at 800. We're going to be ending the year, and I should say 2024, ending the year at 827,000 passengers, which is the left-hand column. That's scheduled number of seats. What's really interesting about that, the last year that we just finished up, our average load factor on those seats was almost 87% full. So not only are the planes getting bigger, but the seats are being occupied more and more. We just did a quick comparison of the entire region, New England region. We are the fullest aircraft in the region when we compare ourselves to Providence and Manchester and Bradley and Portland, Maine, in comparable airports like that. Change on the screen. There. There it is. There. All right, so this is the actual number of passengers that are occupying those seats that I just went through. The solid light blue line is actual numbers, actual passengers that have sat in the seats that were scheduled. The dashed line is the same dashed line that was in the prior side, except it's at an 85% load factor. So projected occupancy of 85%. You can see already the start of this year, we're exceeding the projected average percentage of seats being full. And what's really, really important for our future is that when we start looking at May, June, July, August, September, October, and November, and even beyond that, these are the highest number of seats per month that have been scheduled at the airport, even beyond 2019. This is going to look like a very, very strong year. You can see the totals at the very bottom, 2019, just over 705,000 outbound passengers. Last year, 2023, actually, former Councilor Busher asked about 2022 and 2023. We have 615,000 at 2022. So you can see we're not quite there in pre-pandemic, 660,000 last year. And with these projected numbers on the dash line, we're expected to exceed 705,000 and end up around 710,000. I like to be precise, so let's make bets on where that's going to end. All of this, of course, is the future of the airport and how we program our fiscal budget and how we program our large capital projects to the operating projects that we handle every single day at the airport. I wanted to start with what we just completed and recently presented to the two committee a couple of weeks ago, 6 weeks ago or so. And this is our sustainability management plan, which takes our greenhouse gas emissions inventory for the last couple of years. This report is really gonna help us define how we program, what we budget, and how we do better with the things that we can control, like buildings and vehicle purchases throughout the airport. And I was able to chat with you a little bit, Councilor King, about some of these items as well. What we've studied here is all three scopes, scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 at the airport. Scope 1 and scope 2 are the things we can control, like those buildings and what kind of utilities that we use and where that is sourced from, which is all of the Burlington Electric Department within our terminal building. And we inventoried this so we can look at how we can do better. And how we did better this past year and how we're going to continue to do better is our fleet management. Today, we just got delivered, or last Friday, we just got delivery of our third Ford Lightning. We have a Mach-E and we have an electric street sweeper as well. These are 5 brand new electric vehicles. The first time in the history of the airport that we've ever had 100% electric vehicles. And these aren't just moving from the airport to downtown and elsewhere. These are operational vehicles. That yellow truck is part of Dave's department. Those are the vehicles that are inspecting our runway every single day, managing our FAA requirements, and truly working out there without using a drop of fuel. We're also looking at 2 major projects for the fiscal year 2025 budget. These 2 I just wanted to highlight really quick, both being managed by Larry. One is a full rehabilitation of runway 1533, or almost a full rehabilitation. Really just the asphalt portion of our runway. This generally is done every 10 years, highly complicated. We started the planning process and the grant process this year. It'll take place starting in April of next year. So it won't hit the entire fiscal year 2025. It'll carry over to the next year as well. All night work to make sure that our operations continue all of our operations continue. And then Project Next, we've talked about this quite a bit over the last year and a half. This project Next, which is the north terminal or the north replacement of our terminal building, is scheduled to be shovels on the ground later this year, and comes with a lot of really cool features that we learned, we listened, and we want to make sure the things that we can control from a sustainability standpoint are the things that we build. So this particular building is going to be a mass timber project. This also is going to be heated and cooled with a geothermal field, and it'll have photovoltaic on the top of the roof as well. This is the brand new concept to the airport. We don't have any own geothermal that we own. There are 2 other geothermal fields on the field, one at the Vermont Air National Guard and one at Beta Technology. So we'll be joining that to build this brand new building. Again, projected to start later this year. It'll be a good 18-month project before we start opening, but very, very exciting. And we're here for the numbers. And I'm going to hand it over to Marie to talk really the details of our fiscal year 2025 revenue expenses.
Very good. So the revenues that we're projecting, we're able to take into account our expected passengers, and that drives a lot of where we're going. We're able to look at, we've had some good growth and sustainability with some of our partners. Our car rental companies have been, the revenues that we're getting from them have been very, very strong, as well as the garage revenues. I think the traffic and people's parking, they've been maybe utilizing it a little bit different way, and certain revenues in the garage have been very strong. But all of these things together help us. We're fairly, as far as revenues from this year to last year, are fairly flat, I would say, overall, but as well as our expense budgets in total. We also continue to have some remaining stimulus money that we did receive, and we do intend to, we have about 1.5 years to finish drawing all of that down. So we budgeted the remainder of that currently in fiscal year 2025, this upcoming budget. But depending how we do, we may carry a little bit in the following year or use it all up. So yeah, our assumptions are, you know, we really do think we're going to be very, very close in line with the passengers. 2019 was our highest employment year that we've had, I think, 2008. And we really do think we're going to be pretty much right there. And the demand is strong, and people are looking for that service here. And of course, you know, we want to, the folks that want to fly out of this area, we want to make sure that they're able and have the opportunity out of the Burlington airport, not having to drive to other locations to fly. So, you know, it's good that we have some seats that are coming in. Let's see. So those are just, the slide really gives you a good graphic presentation of all of our revenues, the parking garage, the rental car, you can see how those are going, PFCs. The passenger facility charge is a PFC, and that is a per ticket charge that we get. The airlines charge that as a national program, and we're able to utilize those particular revenues. They are dedicated revenues that we can use for certain things. We use them on our local shares. We're able to go in with applications and pay for them for the local shares that we're doing with our grants. We're also able to, there are equipment and some of the snow removal and other equipment that is eligible. So there are a number of things that are eligible under the PFCs. And we have a healthy balance of PFCs, which we're going in another application shortly for. This chart just gives you the overall on the revenues, line by our major categories. So, you know, it gives you the only one, well, we have two things that have decreases, the QTA revenues, that is just the fuel. So our car rental property, our companies, we have a quick turnaround facility that has a fueling. We manage it for them, but when they're fueling, and this year I found that with gas pricing, the price of things going down and just the usage, I had budgeted a little high in 2024. So I'm kind of reflecting that here and having both the revenues, and it's literally offset with the same expenditure in the budget, so 650 and 650. And then the only other decrease you're seeing is we had budgeted higher revenues. Our stimulus money last year, we had budgeted 4.3. We actually have not needed to draw all of that down. Therefore, that's why we're carrying some of this year. But we are coming closer to the end of using up those particular things. Other than that, all of the revenues we are expecting up. And I guess, yeah, the grant operating, we're expecting less in the grant operating, and that is debatable right now, but we get some money for some police services grant that we are required to have under TSA. Right now, they are putting a pause on the funding. This is at a national level. We've had it for this particular grant for years. We're hoping that they'll re-implement it once they get that passed on the level, but I am reflecting. I don't want to be, I like to be kind of optimistic, but conservative that we can hit these targeted revenues. So that is what we're seeing there. On the expense side of things, our salaries and benefits continue to be the largest increase in our overall budget expense. What you're seeing here in front of you is we had a major reorganization that we did. We wanted to right size to reflect the staffing levels at the airport. During COVID, we actually left a number of positions. We didn't fill every position. We went through a reorg that we brought here and to the city council over a year ago. And in this current fiscal year, it took us a while to recruit and find all the right people to fill those jobs. We still have 2 jobs that we are currently aren't filled yet. But this budget for next year reflects the full year of all of the reorg of all of the positions that we have approval for. So we are anticipating and hoping that we will be filling all those positions, but that will come a time the budget reflects that. The highlights, you know, we at the airport, we believe repairs and maintenance is a really prudent and important thing to do as you go. We like to manage those things. We don't want to get in trouble and then have to be coming and say, well, we didn't get this done. We didn't plan on this. So a lot of the stuff is really preventative maintenance and ongoing maintenance. Some of it, the biggest project we have going on that is a repair and maintenance on the side of it. Nick already talked about this at the last meeting, which is our electrical light replacement throughout the entire garage, to put in energy efficient lighting. It's gonna do a couple of things. It's going to save us money and use less resources for lighting up all those lights. They're going to be, motion sensitive. But another thing is they're going to be a little interesting enough, though they'll be brighter. And so we want folks that are in the garage, that if it's nighttime or other things, we want them to have the visibility. Of course, that's going to be a good thing. So we have the interfund transfers that we have there really reflect our expected anticipated local share on our grants, our construction projects. The state of Vermont and former councilor Sharon Busher did ask about the contribution that we get from the state. Years ago, when I first started with the airport, they would pay a full, when we get a grant from the FAA, it will say they will pay 90%. The state portion is supposed to be 6% and our local share is supposed to be 4%. When I started with the airport, the state of Vermont used to give us the full 6%. They were really good about it. Some years it would be, it could be $800,000. Other years it might be $400,000. And they were always really good about funding what we needed and on their part of that. And starting about 5 years ago, they the cap was $600,000 and they since lowered it to $500,000. And so that is something we desperately need. The airport is really very much not only a regional asset for Chittenden County, but it really is so crucial for the entire state of Vermont. And it would be very helpful if that could be more reflective of that full 6%. So I wanted to answer former councilor Sharon Busher's question on that. We get limited, we need more. It puts a strain on us. We are able to use our PFCs, but we have a lot of needs we want to keep up with. So that's the interfund transfer.
Just to clarify real quick, the requests that we're asking for the state will continue to have these conversations with the state. Isn't additional funds, these are actual fuel taxes that are collected that have to be used for aviation purposes. We should support the state at about $2.2 million per year, and the contribution back to the airport in our local shares is about $500,000. So we're just asking to support our grants, and like we talked about before, we're looking at $80 million in the next year and a half. So that's a significant amount on the 6% share.
Our other expenditures, we are finding things are more expensive, utilities, parts, everything has gone up, but we're trying to manage that actively, and our team does a really good job of doing that. And then our debt service, we had paused it during COVID. We had refinanced 2 years worth of debt service, but we are, as of 2024, this current fiscal year, we're paying our debt about $3.7 million in debt. So overall, our overall expenses are increasing 0.6% from 1 year to the next year. And this is a listing of all of our expenses by category. Try to give you, we have all these different cost centers at the airport. If you look at our actual budget, it's pages and pages and pages long. So just try to give you a sense of our actual operating expenses, which I have a subtotal there so that you can see our actual overall operating expenses is down 1.5%. But I did try to give some understanding of how we're budgeting, why so much money goes in some of those categories, as well as then our debt service for year over year, our capital leases, interfund transfers, and our capital. The bottom is where we're spending money on capital. We always come because most of them. Yeah. All right. Next slide. Thank you, Nick.
That's it. Just to quickly summarize, the bottom two lines of the operating expenditures there, the indirect fees and the airport security fees, those are direct payments to the general fund in some form or the other, whether it's airport police contracted services or all of our indirect fees that the city masterfully manages many of our programs. That's masterfully managed. So just shy of $2 million, just over $2 million in those categories. I also just want to summarize too that every dollar, all of those revenues that we're talking about, those are made at the airport. There's no request from the city, no additional revenues, no taxpayer funding coming to the airport to support any of these expenses, and vice versa. All of the revenues at the airport, unless we're purchasing services like the like the police department or other services from various departments. We have great partnerships, we of course pay our electric bills. We have great partnerships with the city arts and the library, DPW, that we purchase some of those services, and that's what you see in those two line items right there. But this is our FY 2025 budget, and we're excited to start the new year fresh with a brand new budget with an amazing mayor, and we can't wait to keep moving forward and take questions.
And Marie, thank you very much. This obviously reflects a lot of work, so I really appreciate it. Thanks for being first. I'm trying to keep an eye on time, so counselors, I am going to look for folks in the room and online who have questions. I'm going to see where we are in about 15 minutes. And so I'm going to ask counselors to maybe start with 2 questions, then we'll pass to another counselor to make sure we have everyone's voice for a first round, and then I'll see where we are in 15 minutes. Okay. Maybe people want to go home at some point today, so more to go. But any counselors have questions for our presenters? Counselor Carpenter and then Counselor Barlow, and then I'm going to be looking online for hands raised, but we'll start with Counselor Carpenter.
Oh, this is not specific line items, but I'm curious, how is the airport commission involved in this?
We're gonna be, we always talk to them about the budget, same with the budget amendments, like what we just presented to the Board of Finance. They'll go through each one of those items. From a detailed perspective, there's not like a back and forth of our budget. It really is a presentation, just like this.
Counselor Barlow?
Thanks. I had a question that I was thinking about when you were talking about the state local match and they're not funding at 6%. So when the state doesn't fund the local match at that level, how do you make the difference?
Yeah. So everything that we're talking about with that state match is all related to federal aviation grants. Whatever the dollar figure is that the state contributes to those grants at whatever percentage it comes out to, the remaining portion comes through passenger facility charges. So we're allowed under FAA regulations to charge on a ticket price $4.50 per leg of the trip. That price is attached to your ticket. So when you buy your ticket, you're paying that price, and then it gets collected by the airlines. The airlines keeps a portion of it, 11 cents of it, and then the remaining portion comes back to the airport. This is annually revenue $2.833 million that we receive just in those ticket fees. And over time, we can pay for whatever projects to backfill those local shares. It of course still has to be an eligible grant item, but all of those PFCs are backfilled into those projects in a fiscal year. We can also use those dollars for independent purchases that are eligible, like snow equipment and things like that.
So you have a reserve fund of PFC money that you can use to make up any choice.
That's right. Yep.
My second question is around the relationship between the airport and the city with respect to police services. Has there been any discussion in budgeting about maybe using other agencies to fill the services currently provided by Burlington Police Department so that we can free those police officers up to for the needs that we have in the city? And has that been entertained? Would that increase or decrease the amount we're spending on security services?
That does go to a very important question of these services being purchased, whether it's police or other. They do have to be fair market value prices on the cost of that. We have looked at that over various years. We've tried using other departments to backfill some of the officer positions, especially over the last couple of years. Other offices are not available to do that or have similar constraints on their budget. We have another new program that Dave and his team is rolling out right now, which is an employee screening. It's called the Aviation Worker Screening Program that the Department of Homeland Security requires airports to do. This is the first year in history that this is going to be a requirement. We tried using other departments for that as well, and unfortunately, it's not available. I think that is certainly a conversation that should continue.
I'm gonna go Counselor Griffin, and then I'll see if anyone else has questions. I know you already had one of them. So Griffin?
I'm curious about the private planes, these are like smaller planes, and how many there are and how they fit into your general, I think it's the general airline or aviation revenue line, just to get a sense, because it's not broken out. And so I'm not talking about the commercial flights, but
Everything else.
all those little jobs.
Yeah. Yep. And general aviation is essentially defined as everything else. So if it's not commercial or operating under a specific rule within the FAA, then it's general aviation, whether it's a jet aircraft or a private commercial jet, a private corporate jet aircraft, all the way to a training aircraft like a single engine propeller Cessna stuff. So we account for those through our contract with Heritage Aviation. They manage pretty much all general aviation out on the field, and contractually back to us, we receive landing fees, fuel, flowage fees, and some other smaller fees associated with tie downs and services, and a percentage of their revenues as well. We track that, so that figure of airport operations earlier on, we track that by the number of landings and takeoffs at the airport. That contributes significantly to the claim of the second busiest commercial airport in New England because of the quantity of general aviation. We are limited by what we can do with general aviation. We have to allow all aircraft to land and take off at the airport because we are federally funded and we accept these significant amounts of grants, and we've accepted them for decades.
Numbers.
Number of operations.
Yeah, number of those planes, I think, and if you're telling me that these lines, the airline generated revenues or the general airport revenues, it seems like it's a subset of.
Yeah.
Something those.
Yeah, airline generated revenues is just that. General airport revenues is, I wouldn't say.
So I'm just
at all.
curious, I'm just curious as to, is that number that you've got there, that number, the 4.9, for example? No, I can't believe that, because that would take into account.
So from Heritage, we typically receive around $300,000 to $400,000 in annual revenue, and that includes all of those
Okay,
fees.
so that's what I'm looking
That's actually in the concessions related revenue section.
at. So it's 300 to 400K, and it's about how many landings there are?
Not off the top of my head, but it's over 50% of our annual operations.
Back to you,
Thank you. I had one other question, I'm sorry, but it relates to late night transportation. I had the joy of sitting on a committee with Councilor Barlow related to the taxis at the airport. I'm curious because there are problems if people are not parking in the garage. The stories that I recall are folks having very limited options for transportation from the airport to wherever they're going to be, at their home or a friend's or a hotel. And so I'm curious about that aspect, and in particular, whether the growth in flights that you're seeing also includes more late night arrivals, which would then cause some issues.
I think we've seen a couple of changes recently through that group, through the vehicle for hire board, and the changes in the rates that recently were passed, which are now published on the side of our buildings, and as along with the customer bill of rights is what it's called, to make sure that not only do you have a fair rate, but you have a clean and a decent car. That it seems to be working with surcharges specific to the airport, meaning the drivers of these independent companies can collect more fees for that. We charge $500 a year for a permit to operate out of the airport. We don't administer the taxi licenses throughout the city, just that $500 a year to operate at the airport, and that's called a Q permit. We increased the number of Q permits sold. That's actually a function of the airport commission. By charter is one of the things that they do is manage ground transportation at the airport commission. And that was increased. We sold additional numbers to increase the amount of drivers that can operate at the airport. The surcharges are also related to nighttime operations. So not only a surcharge at the airport, a surcharge after a specific time. And we're hopeful that that's gonna help with additional drivers. Uber and Lyft, which is a different category of drivers, also contributes to that availability. Generally, the Uber and Lyft revenue to the airport, which is $2 per pickup and drop off, is around $15,000 to $20,000 per month of operation. So it's a significant amount. What I think might need to happen later once we start looking at the real data to make sure that there's operations at night, because it just got passed or just got instituted, is looking at not just quantity of Q permits, but Q permits per section of the day. So we know how many people are operating instead of free for all.
I look forward to reporting at the tube on, the metrics that you collect, because I believe that you gotta look to customer satisfaction.
That's right.
Figure out how to do that so that folks aren't stranded when we get here, because that makes it sour taste.
We're going to move back to Councilor Carpenter and then I see Councilor Kane.
Thanks. I just wanted to piggyback on Councilor Barlow's comment about working on the police officers at the airport. And what I heard you say is basically you don't have an alternate, you can't find either with other departments or is that what I'm hearing? You don't have any source contract with that would free up those officers?
Not on the smaller scales that we looked at, like filling in vacant positions or filling in vacant time periods that we needed officers. We weren't able to find any neighboring department that was able to fulfill that. We have not gone out to bid or anything.
So you've not looked at the whole function, so to speak?
That's right. That's a good way of saying that.
Okay, you've not done that yet.
Correct.
Councilor Kane.
Thanks. I have a question about the greenhouse gas emissions. So there is 2019 data in this report from last November. Is there that tracked on an ongoing basis?
It is. So it is our 2019 inventory for two reasons. One, that was our highest year that we've had since 2008. So we wanted to track, especially the scope 1 and scope 2 emissions at the benchmark, at the real number, using gas, Vermont gas for our buildings and electricity and waste and water, et cetera. We did study scope 3 emissions, which is all aircraft greenhouse gas emissions, from military to commercial to private. Those, especially those operations, we tracked at 2023. Because we were higher back then. We just talked about how busy we were over the last couple of years. We were higher back then. So that's a combination of the two highest benchmarks. So we can really look at what the future looks like. We label that as 2019 because that is the earlier year, and we're going through an accreditation process, which requires those higher benchmark years.
Thanks. Then my second question is, you mentioned several times that the scope 1 and scope 2 emissions, you guys have control over, but not scope 3. I am wondering though, is there any lever you guys have control over, or the city does where we could make sure, I don't know, carbon emissions are being paid for, surcharge to some extent, flying, since that's where 99% of the emissions come from.
Yeah, we haven't looked at any type of user fee or surcharge or the legality of that. There are some restrictions on what we can fairly charge any aircraft coming into the airport. What we do though is policy changes. One of the big policy changes that we instituted this past year was called the auxiliary power unit restrictions. So of course, aircraft, especially commercial aircraft, have the jet engines that you can visibly see. Well, there's an auxiliary engine that is running off of fuel that is essentially powering the aircraft when it's sitting at the gate, loading, typing in all the computer stuff. We said no more of that. We like using clean BED energy. plug into our jet bridges, use the electricity off of our jet bridges to power the aircraft while sitting at the gate. Those are the types of policy changes that that we're trying to actively look for and change the type of operation. And it doesn't use diesel engines or ground power units or any of those types of things.
Super quick follow-up, do you know if any airport in the world charges for carbon, user fee related to carbon emissions?
In the world, I don't know. In the United States, I don't know of any as well. Definitely the United States has much different rules and regulations associated with FAA protocols.
Thanks, Councilman. Everyone has very important questions, and I'm just trying to monitor our time so we all can complete before 1 p.m. So, Councilor Newbeezer, and then I'm wondering if anyone else has questions we have not asked yet, so I can, because we are at 6:30, and if any other councilor online in particular has questions, please raise your hand while we go to Councilor Newbeezer.
Just want to say very quickly, I'll keep it brief because I know it's 6:30. I guess it's my intention. I don't have any specific questions. Jean and Joe just hit on them. Want to pursue with you how we can get creative. I understand the fact that we're dealing with the FAA makes either getting more money out of the airport difficult, and certainly from a climate perspective, limiting flights, trying to put a price on carbon, etc., is difficult. But I think we I hope we're approaching those issues with a spirit of creativity moving forward. Thanks, though.
Always and happy to have those conversations.
Thanks, Councilor Newbeezer. Are there any other questions from councilors who have not had their 2-question moment board? Thanks for laughing at my jokes, Dale. Gotta keep it moving. All right. I'm not seeing any other questions. So with that, thank you very much, everyone from the airport, for your presentation. We'll move on to our next item. Thanks so much. Thank you. Next up, we have the Burlington Electric Department. For this next one, we're going to attempt to do tabs on timing, so share your time wisely. We're going to try to do a 15-minute presentation, then we can leave time for 15-20 minutes on questions. We'll see how we do. Okay.
Thank you.
Get everyone up here, quick introduction, and then we'll go into your presentation. And again, reminder, councilors, we'll try to do 2 questions for you each, so they spread and save the time. Just think of those questions while you can, and I'll take you.
Good evening, everybody. Darren Springer, General Manager with Burlington Electric Department. We can do some intros, maybe starting with Collins.
Hello, all. Paul Alexander, Manager of Safety and Risk Management, 30th year.
Emily Stebbins-Realock, CFO and Manager of Strategy at Burlington.
And Munia Casting, COO and Leader of Community Services at UG.
Good evening, Mike Cameron, Manager of Customer Care, Communications, and Management Services.
And I'll note that our colleague James Gibbons, Director of Policy and Planning, is online as well, listening in. We're glad to be here with you to share details of the FY25 budget and rate change. I wanted to put in context that this budget and the rate change have gone before our electric commission, were unanimously recommended by the commission on May 8th to the Board of Finance and City Council. We are bringing a number of financial related items to the board and the City Council on June 3rd, including the rate change and miscellaneous fee changes and our line of credit extension. So we will be bringing a number of those items that day. But we will jump in. Emily and I will tag team a little bit on these slides. We'll try to go as quickly as we can, and we will try to cover some of the topics that were raised, questions that were raised previously. Emily, why don't you kick it off?
Okay. So for context, I'll start actually with the last bullet. So when we develop a budget at BED, we are developing a net income statement, a profit and loss statement essentially, and then we're developing a cash flow statement. So we budget both for revenue and expense as an enterprise fund, and then we budget to make sure we have sufficient cash flow to cover operations throughout the year, as well as to see what is our projected ending cash balance, and is that sufficient to meet our Moody's metrics for liquidity purposes. So the goal going into this budget was to actually improve our Moody's rating metrics modestly, but to inch them up a little bit while minimizing any rate increase for our customers. So additional context, sales to customers in Burlington have been flat to declining since the early 2000s. We have seen uptake in heat pumps and EVs and strategic electrification, which is great. But those gains, residential sales are only about 75% of our total sales. Residential customers are 75%, but they use only about 25% of the electricity. Most of the electricity is used by our commercial and industrial customers. And so as we've seen with reduced commercial square footage in the city, increased efficiency and loss of manufacturing, our sales have been flat to declining. So our major source of revenue is not growing on its own. That's the big takeaway. We're hoping to change that with net zero and increased electrification, but we're not seeing it yet in the actual results. For 3 years now, we have requested rate increases, as I'm sure you're well aware. Also for 3 years, those rate increases have been less than what we could demonstrate that we need, we believe, to the state regulators. So we have asked for less than what we truly have needed, and we've been managing to make do with those lesser rate increases to minimize the impact on Burlington ratepayers. Also important in this budget is that forward prices for next winter's energy are lower than they have been for the past 2 years. For the past 2 years, they have been unprecedentedly high 2 years ago, and then still high, but not quite so high last year. So this budget, they're down to more typical winter prices. That increases budget pressure, it increases expense, but it's actually not more cost, it's actually less revenue to us because the excess winter energy we're selling we're gonna be paid less for it, we believe, based on current forward prices for next winter. So it increases pressure on the budget to have a positive net income, but it actually reduces downside risk because it's more conservative, we're not counting on the extra revenue. If winter prices come in high, great. If they don't, we've budgeted for them to be typical. Continued inflationary pressures, obviously, we all know the economy we're in. We have level funded what we call controllable operating expenses. I'll cover that in more detail later. We don't have a great starting cash position for FY25. We're projecting to end 24 just about at 90 days. That's the minimum target we have for Moody's. In FY24, we saw less rec revenues than we budgeted for, and we had less excess winter energy sales at lower prices.
Let me just level set one item on the rec revenues because I know it came up. So every renewable resource, not just McNeil, every renewable resource has a rec value within the New England market. And the way Vermont policy has been established, you can sell recs, you can trade recs, you can buy recs. And at the end of the day, BED is always 100% renewable, actually exceeding 100% renewable, which is why we have excess winter energy to sell. So we're always long, so to speak, typically on power that is renewable. But so recs are a revenue source that is definitely secondary to sales to customers, but it's an important revenue source. It certainly supports ratepayers and would, if it was eliminated altogether, would otherwise cause significant upward rate pressure. But rec revenues are a benefit to every renewable resource. So when we look at hydro, solar, wind, any resource in our portfolio, the revenues are benefited by the rec value. And when we talk about underproduction for recs, that's not specific to McNeil. In fact, that can be related to wind, for example. Expected, just as an example.
And then final point on this slide is that this year in FY25, we anticipate using up the last piece of the construction fund from the 2022 net zero revenue bond. Okay, moving on, this is the sort of overview of our income statement. Operating revenues in FY25 are budgeted at a total of $6.7 million. That is 3.8% higher than FY24. That's made up of sales of 56 million, rec revenue of 7.6 million, and other revenue of 3.9 million. Key drivers within operating revenues, we will be requesting, we believe, a rate increase of up to 5.5% effective September 1st. As I said, kilowatt hour sales are flat. Rec sales revenues of 7.6 million are budgeted to be down 7.4% compared to last year's budget, primarily due to lower production volumes in calendar year 24 primarily due to lower production from our wind contracts. We have 3 wind contracts. Those are all overall down in calendar year 24, as well as McNeil. And then we have revised our conduit rental rates that we charge to communications companies for use to put fiber in our conduits. Those will be increasing those rates effective July 1st. Operating expenses, 68.2 million, that's 2% higher than the FY24 budget. There's additional cost, or it's really, like I said, not more cost, but less revenue in the purchased power category, which is down 3.5. The sale of excess winter energy is down 3.5 million or 78%. That means purchased power costs are up net. We have assumed energy prices that are lower. You can see the sort of all year average is $52 a megawatt hour. Last year, the all year average was $73.60. You can see the dramatically reduced prices in the winter. This has been a point of continued discussion with our electric commission, who's very engaged on this topic and wanting to understand how we're budgeting for that for FY25. Transmission has been a cost driver for years. The transmission chart goes up and it only goes up. That is again up 8% this year, or $783,000. The total transmission bill, $10.5 million. Net power supply expense on a per megawatt hour basis. So looking at not only how much does the power cost, but how much does the power cost per unit of power you are selling. So comparing it to your load is only 54 cents higher than the 24 budget. We have also budgeted for a 4% cost of living increase for our IBEW contract. Significant in this budget is the amount of grants and customer contributions to capital projects. It's $1.8 million higher than FY24, a total of $2.2 billion. A lot of that driven by Champlain Parkway, City Place, the Winooski Bridge rebuild. So as we're seeing construction pick up in the downtown and state projects that require utility relocation, they contribute to BED's costs to perform those services for the project. So importantly, if you notice, operating revenues minus operating expenses is an operating loss. So we have an operating loss of $644,000. That's an important metric from a sort of financial ratio perspective. Our operating loss last year was 1.9 million. So even though we have a loss, it's a lot smaller loss that we're budgeting for this year. And then total net income, the bottom line is 3.4 million. But again, 2.2 million of that is grants. So that's kind of non-operating income. So the total net income is higher than last year by 3 million. And we're projecting an ending cash balance of 9.8 million at the end of the fiscal year. All right, here's the controllable expenses, and I'll do my best to explain this. So we define controllable expenses as all of our operating and maintenance expenses, except power supply, except transmission, except EEU rebate payments.
Energy efficiency utility. Which program we run at the state regulated level.
And except for the return, like an A&G overhead rate on capital projects. So it's labor and software contracts and computer supplies and postcards and it's everything except power supply, transmission, and EEU reimbursements primarily. That is down actually $80,000 from last year's budget, or 0.4%. That's the blue line. The red line shows the growth trend that BED was on prior to FY16. If that had continued, we'd be growing 5.84% year over year on these expenses. On average, we're 3.3% since FY16.
And I want to thank our team. The ability to get that below the FY24 level required about 1.5 million of cuts from the initial draft. So there was a lot of work going into holding that line where it is.
5 minutes.
We got to speed it up.
Capital. We're going to make $11 million investment in the BED physical plant this year. And we're going to invest $577,000 in Velco. We receive a dividend on our Velco equity investment, so that's a big investment to make. You can see the breakdown of the capital plant budget, half of it to the distribution system, 21% to the generation facilities, 21% to IT, buildings, vehicles, and then a little bit of other. This is a new slide that we haven't shown before, but just in terms of understanding our capital financing. Previously, so BED and city charter has a provision that we can receive a $3 million general obligation bond every year, which the city graciously issues for us with its package of other GO bonds every year. Back in FY13, that $3 million was 58% of our capital budget. It stayed at $3 million as our capital budget has grown, as inflation has grown, as everything has gotten more expensive. So that's now 27%. It used to be that basically we'd invest $3 million in our distribution plant and we'd get $3 million from the GO bond, and our capital program was just about taken care of, and then we could finance, like through our cash reserves, some other improvements. That is no longer, as you can see, kind of a workable financing plan, which is why we needed to do a 2022 revenue bond, which is why we anticipate needing to do another revenue bond following that one in order to continue to fund capital improvements at a rate that we believe is a prudent, reasonable rate in order to maintain our fiscal plan.
Okay. We know that the net zero energy incentives and investments are very important. Obviously, we're continuing with a number of the enhanced incentives that we've launched over the past several years, including some newer incentives that we've launched just recently. We have about $3.5 million between our efficiency funds and our electrification tier 3 funds. And as a reminder for the council, with the revenue bond, we've been able to invest in incentives above and beyond the compliance level for the state of Vermont. So we as a utility are consciously trying to overinvest essentially in electrification for our customers to support progress towards the net zero energy goal. The current revenue bond has given us a great matching fund opportunity as a number of different federal grants have come forward, and we've been able to utilize that. So that could be another benefit if we seek an additional bond. We are going to do a reversed RFP with the community for level 3 and level 2 chargers to seek input on locations for new charging investments. So stay tuned for more on that. I know the airport mentioned electrification of their fleet. We've been working on our fleet as well. We have F-150 Lightnings replacing fossil fuel trucks. We have Mach-E's, Chevy Bolts, Nissan Leafs. We also have the all-electric bucket truck. We are going to try to get a grant to support a second all-electric bucket truck within our fleet as well as part of the FY25 process. We have the heat pump rate pilot that came to the council previously. And as Emily mentioned, we're going to be working on another bond to support continuation of this work. So this got some attention earlier. I want to mention that all the investments that are included here are included at the requirement of the district energy resolution that passed the council in November of 2023. And I think we worked on some provisions, Councilor Burlington, Councilor Barlow, and others, Councilor Jang. So there is funding within the budget for a wood chip dryer process. So we did an RFI that was issued in December of 2023. I think it was required to be issued by March of 24, but we did it 3 months early. We've received some interesting responses. I want to mention again, we're 50% owner of this plant. We have joint owners that made capital decisions with us, so we can't make unilateral decisions on investment, but we're including in our budget funding to support additional work on feasibility and engineering analysis to add a wood chip dryer as part of responding to that initial set for the RFI. We were required to put in funding for a third-party study on forestry. We've done that. We were required to put in funding for a study process with the Electric Commission and other entities, and we've done that as well. I know we're probably out of time right now.
That magical net. So maybe we can wrap it in the next 2 or so minutes and highlight the most important stuff on slides, and I'm sure councilors will have questions on their slides.
I think why don't we have some really great stuff going on with the equity program. We can skip over that slide. The Moody's metrics here are very important. We target 90 days cash on hand. We target the adjusted debt service coverage ratio at 1.5. We've been below that a bit since COVID, but we try to improve that number every time we can. You can see in the FY25 budget, we're targeting an improvement from FY24 in the adjusted debt service coverage ratio, and improvement modestly on days cash on hand. That'll be supported by the line of credit that we'll bring you on June 3rd. These are the numbers that help us keep the A rating, that keeps the interest rates low when we go out to bond for the net zero energy revenue bond. And then, so we mentioned the charter change that has been passed by the House and the Senate. It's going to the governor. So we're hopeful to be able to do this at the $10 million level as approved on town meeting day. We will be bringing the miscellaneous service fees, as I mentioned. The renewable energy standard could impact some of our future power supply planning. That passed is heading to the governor. We've talked about the revenue bond. So why don't we go very briefly into the rate slides? I'll do a lightning fast version of this.
I expect that.
Yes.
Last one.
So this is just looking at where we've had rate changes in the past. Next slide. I think Emily covered the drivers. I do want to just harp on this just for a moment. The drivers of the rate case are, we are not seeing growth in sales to customers. We are seeing higher costs on power supply and transmission. We pay transmission costs to be connected to the region. It's not something we get to choose to pay or not pay. And we are seeing continued pressures in the electric sector, even above and beyond inflation. Next slide, please. You can see, Emily mentioned we did ask for less than what is justified. What we've asked for is in blue over the past 3 years. What is in red is what would have been justified in the regulatory process. I mentioned electricity prices have averaged 7.7% annual increase over the past 3 years. That's above inflation. And that's our rate cases have been below that number every single year. So next slide, please. Here you can see different types of commodities and goods and services and BED's rate changes dating back to 2010. Although we are, moving a little bit because we've had to do annual adjustments, we are still well below what we're seeing in other sectors. Importantly for our customers, residential rates remain well below, even with the proposed increase, the New England average and even the Vermont average by a significant margin. And we have the energy assistance program as the purple line there. That's for income qualified customers. They see an even lower rate on residential. Commercial industrial is moved up a little bit. We are not showing on this chart the data from 2023 and 2024 from New England. I think we're still below that line for New England, but we are seeing some increased pressure on the commercial and industrial rates. And then that's the total rate comparison. We are still below the other Vermont utilities and New England based on total rates. This is the bill impact of the current rate increase that's proposed. You can see $4.51 residential, $5.71 small general. Small general are 66% of our commercial customers, roughly speaking. The energy assistance program is a percentage, not a bill credit. So as rates change, the percentage and the value of that program changes as well. We have a pending at the PUC, a request to make that program permanent and allow us to opt everyone in as opposed to having to have them sign up. We anticipate that could quadruple or more the enrollment. So we're excited about that. And that's it. How's that?
That's well done. Okay.
We're delighted to take your questions.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you bearing with me for timing.
Of course.
I'm joking. Okay, counselors, especially counselors who didn't get a first pass at the last presentation, just to give you first the cue. Councilor Broderick.
Thank you. So going to talking about the two the study on the future of McNeil, could you explain fully? I might have missed this. Or was just but can you explain the full scope of this study and how that money is being used to determine the future of McNeil?
Yeah, so the district heat resolution had a number of different items in it. It authorized district heat, approved it from the council. It requested that we look into this wood chip dryer and do process around that. It had a number of different studies. It sought improvement, I would characterize overall improvement in the environmental footprint of the plant. We can talk about whether you want to look at emissions from the stack or whether you want to look at life cycle emissions more holistically and include forestry values. But there's no doubt that if you're able to improve the environmental footprint of the plant, that's a benefit no matter what. We're doing some things that are innovative at McNeil. We have a solar test center with UVM and Senator Sanders partnership. So some of the pieces that we're looking at as part of these analyses are How can we do, new and innovative things at the plant? Are there different types of technologies that would reduce our reliance on traditional wood chip combustion? Are there different ways that we can improve efficiency? Are there different ways we can improve the environmental footprint of the plant? Are there different technologies, generation technologies, and or fuel sources that would improve the environmental footprint of the plant? So it's really helping to inform those types of questions that if we want to have a local control over some of our power supply, and we want to be able to dispatch that power supply, how can we do it in a way that would improve the environment?
Thank you. And then I guess I'll use my second question to allow you to go into depth on the equity aspects.
Thank you very much. We'll pull that back up just briefly. Appreciate that. We have brought on a little while ago a project and equity analyst, Ethan Meno, who's working with Jen Green, our sustainability director for the city, and they are part of the Center for Innovation, which is Emily's team. And here we go. We mentioned the energy assistance program. So that's the 12.5% rate discount for income qualified customers. ETA has been holding office hours at the King Street Laundromat, community gardens, the family room at the Old North End Community Center, BHA facilities, community events. A lot of great partnerships that we're having with the different organizations named here: CBOEO, Legal Aid, AALB, the Vermont Language Justice Task Force. Really doing a lot of work trying to explain some of the just kind of things like, what does your electric bill mean? We have a great new video that's translated now with 9 languages. What does it look like when you get your electric bill? What are the different pieces? How does it work? Also sharing information about our efficiency programs, about the energy assistance program. A lot of different community events, house parties. We'll have tents at different events around the city. We had VE tent for Earth Day on the marketplace. We'll be here for Juneteenth, Pride Celebration, Community Garden Work Day, Harvest Run. So really just trying to expand our presence, meet our customers where they are, make sure they're getting information that they need, make sure that we have language translation opportunities if they need that, and make sure that all of our customers can access our programs. Because at the end of the day, the great thing about having an ambitious net zero energy goal is everybody's got to be all in. And if we can't reach some of our customers, we're not helping them, we're not doing our job. So equity is an important aspect of that. Thanks for allowing us to jump into that a little bit.
Other questions from counselors?
It's always been happening. So first, this is not a question, but a request for information going forward. I would love more specific granularity addressing the economic claims on McNeil that were made in a public forum tonight. And I would also like to get the documents, whatever you've got on the studies. I push those, I fully support those. I just need to see, the specifics of what we're talking about that. I am interested in whatever studying you've done on a net zero revenue bond, another one going forward, what it would pay for, the kind of things, and more granularity on the reduction in wind production. I just don't understand. Is it less wind that happens? Is it less demand? Is it less what? Those are the requests going forward for information. They're not questions, but I'll give it one question. We'll make that one. And I've got like 3 more, but I would love to understand the breakdown in the reduced commercial industrial usage between efficiency and vacancies. So you talked about there being a reduction, but you did not specify the difference between the two. And I need it, and I believe that we need it as as policymakers, as public.
Okay, thank you, Councilor Bergman. If I could, I'll try to hit on a couple of those points. I think we're going to come to the Toque sometime soon to talk a little about some of the McNeil items. So happy to characterize some of those.
I don't need those. Those were not asking.
No, understood. I just wanted to mention it. Yep. And I do want to just take a moment to mention that when we talk about any renewable resource that we have, and we own some and operate plants, and then we also purchase. You can talk about a lot of different things. We should make sure we're apples to apples. Is the plant making a profit? Is it revenues more than expenses is one way to look at things, right? Is the plant, profitable compared to the market? But that means you're buying natural gas potentially. That's another way you look at things. Is the plant profitable is one way to look at it. Is it lower cost, all things considered, than what else you might be able to get through renewable resources? Another way to look at it. So that would be my initial just thought on some of the context there is we
We'd
really
love for you to be able to lay those out.
should really
so that-
dig into that.
So that we're all talking
Yes.
the same language.
Yes.
Very important.
So that's important. On the commercial energy use, vacancies has been a significant driver. If we want to talk about some of the reduction, if you talk about, the downtown city place being offline, now we'll be seeing it come back online in the not distant future. The high school being offline, Blodgett leaving and Hula replacing it. Hula is a great facility. They use geothermal and solar and have EV charging, but from an energy use perspective, Blodgett was a much more energy intensive user. So efficiency is playing a role, but I would argue that vacancies are playing a significant role, and we can certainly follow up with you with more data on that. Because we are hoping that as some of these vacancies become occupied facilities again, that we will see some rebound in the commercial sales as part of that. So
And
love
some
to
of
see
it's
where-
change of use too,
Yeah.
right? Manufacturing to office, right? Specialty filaments, coffee cup, Blodgett. We don't have that kind of industry in Burlington anymore, and we likely won't, right, in the future. So now we have Hulas and different kinds of businesses, so that's some of it as well.
I think that more information on that would be helpful. I'd love to see that. It's certain that it informs how we go forward in that framework.
okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Counselor, other questions from City Council? Councilor Barlow?
Thank you. I'm curious, you had mentioned, that were able to carve $1.5 million off of an earlier preliminary draft of your budget. What sort of things did you have to eliminate to make those plans?
Yeah, well, and I want to give credit to the team and everybody worked on it. Some of that's going to be deferring, items that we might have wanted from a maintenance standpoint, trying to reduce anywhere we can, outside services, technical contracts. Some of it's going to be deferrals, and then trying to really manage vacancies in particular, because we do see just rolling kind of average of a certain number of vacancies in a given year, and that has some beneficial impact in a way on the budget as projected. So in this budget, we're really trying to manage to a certain number in terms of vacancy savings as part of those reductions. Knowing we have, typically we've had between 10 and 12 positions vacant at any given time, just due to turnover, retirements, it's a tough labor market. It's been hard to fill positions. Sometimes we only get 1 or 2 qualified applicants. Sometimes it takes 2 or 3 cycles of posting to get there. So part of managing this budget to that level is going to be managing kind of month to month and making sure we're hitting some of those vacancy targets.
Thank you, and I apologize in advance. I'm trying to get about sending my questions in advance so I don't surprise you. I appreciate it.
No trouble.
Answer to that.
Counselor, other questions? Sorry, thank you, visual. Counselor Newbeezer?
Oh, sorry, I put my hand up late. I snuck it.
All right.
I just wonder, just for my own general background, so I'm starting to understand as a new counselor, when it comes to, so you're setting rates based on what the PUC says we can set rates at, and there's some process there. How do they look at, hey Wally, how do they look at balancing, I guess, putting disproportionate rate increases on different segments of ratepayers, if that makes sense? So not saying this is a good idea, but if tomorrow we wanted to offset all of our budget by throwing a huge burden on commercial versus residential, et cetera, is there sort of some built-in parameters you have to follow?
Yeah, no, thank you for the question. So currently, when we have an increase, it goes as an increase equally across all different rate classes as a percentage. I think what you're referring to would be something like a rate design study, which we haven't done in a number of years. And that would look at the allocation, the appropriate allocation between rate classes. And what happens there is they look at the energy use mix allocation between commercial, residential, industrial, to the extent you have that, and how much your rates are currently allocating to each of those classes, and could redistribute So we as a utility or we as a city don't really have the ability to allocate to any particular rate class. But you could do a rate design study. It could turn out that it's residential is paying, you know, less than it should and commercial paying more, and it could result in residential bills being higher and commercial bills being lower. So it's not something that we've necessarily looked at pursuing in any sort of near term, but I think that's kind of what you're talking about there.
All set, Counselor?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. Any other questions?
Just a quick question, you guys mentioned, I think it's related to Connecticut and rec sales are gonna be lower.
We didn't mention it. I think it was mentioned.
Or somebody mentioned it,
Yeah.
but can you guys elaborate on why the rec sales will be down? I guess how that relates to operations at McNeil. And you know, we'd also talked about how rec rates are, if there are differences between states for different types of energy, so if you guys could just explain those things a little bit more.
Absolutely. So as it relates to McNeil, there is a change in Connecticut's market where you can sell half of the output there, but you can't sell all of the output there at a future date, which I think was referenced in public comment. So currently that tends to be the market where you would sell some of those McNeil related recs. If you have a wind rec, you may sell it in Massachusetts, for example, because that's the better market for wind. So there, like you said, there's all different markets for different resources. That said, McNeil, first of all, we only get half, obviously, of the revenue in the recs. So there's joint owners who are getting half of it. But for our share, that would mean that you have half of the output would go elsewhere. Could be that it goes to another state, depending on what their market looks like. Could be that you use it in Vermont. We've had commission discussions going back a number of years about the benefit of having more of our renewable resources used for our own compliance in Vermont, as opposed to selling some credits and buying some credits, which is the current process. So it's conceivable that you could use a portion of McNeil recs here instead of using hydro recs, say, from outside of Vermont. That's one way you could go, and that has some economic value. It may not have the same economic value as what you get from Connecticut, although all of this is sort of forecasting future prices. So one option would be to sell into a different market. Another option would be that you could use it in Vermont. The renewable energy standard update that just passed makes clear that you can continue to do that with McNeil and Reigate, that they continue to count in Vermont's policy. So it would just be a look at what are the best options for ratepayers and some of the policy choices that we want to make in terms of whether we want to use those resources here if the delta between using them here and selling the credits was not particularly large as it might be.
Thanks. Good questions.
Briefly,
Sorry.
I know this may be difficult, but I'm curious whether or not, in terms of your rate setting, do you look out at all the projections beyond FY25? I mean, at this point in time, do you have any sense as to, if we were to do 5.5% now, what are we really looking at for FY26, FY27 for your customers?
We do 5-year planning that we also work on for our submissions to Moody's. And I think, correct me if I get any of this wrong, because I'm working off memory here. But I think we had projected that we might have in FY26, I think a relatively similar number as FY25, something in the kind of mid-single digits. And the projection from there is that the numbers decline. We do think there's a value to having regular annual rate updates as opposed to what we did. We had a 12-year run with no rate increases, which was great. But then when we did start, changing rates coming out of the pandemic, there was more pressure than I think we would have liked. So having annual updates, even if they're just a couple percent, is better and more predictable than trying to do it all in one chunk. The renewable energy standard bill that I mentioned also makes an update to municipal utility regulatory authority in Vermont, where it changes from 2% to 3%. The rate change that a municipality can pursue, distinct from any other form of utility, without going through a fully litigated process automatically. It still could go through a fully litigated process, but there's not a presumption that it might. So that's also attractive just from a staff allocation resource, to look at the 2 to 3% range being not a full litigation process necessarily versus 5% being a full litigation process. So our goal is to get down into that range where we're looking at 2 or 3% changes as opposed to mid-single digits.
Okay. Really brief follow-up question, totally different issue here. Ballpark, you know, how many of your employees currently work at McNeil?
Yes, 35, but then another 10 or so that are part of the Pine Street team that are involved with McNeil, either because they're doing, let's say, accounting work primarily for McNeil, or some of the policy planning team works with McNeil. So 35, yeah, at the plant, another 10 or so at the main office that are involved in some way. Great, thanks, thank you.
Okay, we're just about at 15 or so minutes on the question side of this. Are there any other burning questions from counselors before we wrap up on this agenda? Okay,
Super quick,
yeah.
so yeah, I think Pike sent an email today, he said that it would be cheaper to shut McNeil down today, and I think he suggested hydropower, is that the case, is that your understanding?
No, so again, I want to do really apples to apples. So, you know, if you were to shut McNeil down, which is not a decision we get to make unilaterally, then you have to look at all the different values that McNeil provides. And you have to look at whether you can even get a equivalent amount of hydropower in Vermont, which I'm not clear that you can, you know, from a contractual standpoint. McNeil provides capacity value and provides some value in terms of the transmission system in Burlington. If you were buying a different resource, you're going to get a different capacity value. If you're buying outside of Burlington versus here, there may be differences in terms of the transmission. So really, it's impossible to make a statement like that without underlying market intelligence, I think. And I would challenge anyone who thinks there's an excess supply of renewable energy available to purchase in New England. That's not our experience. We did an RFP not too long ago looking at, you know, because we have a position where we do have contracts that expire over time, like hydro contracts, wind contracts. So we're in the market looking at what else might be out there. We did an RFP, we did not get an overwhelming response in terms of, you know, hydro or wind or those types of options being available. So it's not something that you can make that kind of determination without understanding what the energy markets look like. And if you were to shut it down and you didn't have a replacement, you'd be running off of the grid, which is essentially mostly natural gas, which in my view would be a huge step backwards from a climate standpoint. Thank you.
Okay, I think we're there.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you,
you all very much. A lot of hard work again. Much appreciation.
Thank you all.
All right, moving right along. Leo Chad, are you ready? Ready. You are intended up, and I'm here to back you up as necessary to discuss the fiscal year 25 draft general fund budget. This is a bit of an update on some prior work we shared with the council in another fashion around what we're projecting for the budget gap. And so we prepared something that helps to give you the latest update. I'm gonna let the CEO take it from there, and then we're gonna try to do the thing 15 minutes or less, extra points or less for a presentation, and then we'll see where we are for about 15 or 20 minutes with questions. Brad, do you want to join us to the table? Or you guys sitting? I guess you are. Okay. All right. Catherine, please take it away.
All right. Let's see if I can do this in 2 minutes or less. Let's start quickly reviewing our budget principles. There are 5 of them. The first one is we are really committed to affordability for Burlington taxpayers. And we are trying to marry that with ensuring that we have sustainable financial practices that are really moving us away from relying on one-time funds. Those of you who were here throughout the pandemic know that over the past few years, we have been relying on some of the ARPA and other one-time funds. And as those are drying up, we need to identify new revenue sources. Part of that work will also be to ensure that we have right-sized the size of our city government, ensuring that we provide what the community needs most now and into the future. We want to ensure that we are fair in raising new revenue and that we're doing that across the entire community, and that the budget is reflecting the priorities of our community. Those include community safety, maintaining city services, creating good process for city employees and unions, and also the public to engage in these larger questions. When I presented to you last time, we had some assumptions that came from the previous administration. These have been updated. In this current version of the budget, we have current staff are all included. We've kept the 7.5% attrition, except where it's noted. A change in this version of the budget is, and this number is shifting as we work on the budget, but 22 or 23 currently vacant positions. And we will point those out as we go through each of the presentations. We have also received the user fee study, a draft of that, and kudos to department heads, some of whom are listening tonight, who are also multitasking and working on their budgets to increase those user fees appropriately so that those can be included in the FY25 budget. And we are coming back, as was alluded to in the Board of Finance meeting, proposing that we use some of the remaining ARPA funds, which do need to be obligated by the end of December, and then used by the end of 2026 to help fill the gap. Here is where we are over time. The budget is currently coming in just over $107 million. And again, this is just the general fund budget. Now we'll go through what are some of the solutions that the administration and I are proposing to help fill that gap. First up is what we are proposing with regards to taxes. There is a bit of a change you may notice on this slide. When we spoke last, we were proposing implementing all 3 cents of the public safety tax increase that had been approved by voters. As you'll see in this slide, we are now proposing using 2 of the 3 cent increase, and then raising the gross receipts rate on everything that's not lodging. And for those of you who are not familiar, the gross receipts is also called the rooms and meals tax, and it covers meals, alcohol, amusements, admissions, hotels, and short-term rentals. And so we'll set aside short-term rentals as the council over the past year or two dealt with that separately, and we're not we're not suggesting any changes to that rate in this budget proposal. We are, as we have spoken about, proposing that we raise the hotel tax from 2 to 4%. That would bring in an additional $1 million. And then on everything that is not lodging, so meals, alcohol, admissions, and amusements, that we would raise the local portion from 2 to 2.5%. Please note the very last line here that we are proposing this increase for just 1 year. That this increase would sunset after a year, but that increase would bring in approximately $700,000. As I mentioned, we have gotten a draft of the user fee study. And these conversations are continuing. Some of the big work that we wanted to complete from the user fee study will continue into FY25, and that is ensuring that we have a city policy agreed on by the Board of Finance and likely the City Council around how do we as a city want to charge fees vis-a-vis cost recovery, ensuring that we have a consistent policy regarding equity and scholarship. Each department is paying attention to those issues, but maybe doing it in a slightly different way. And we want to make sure that we are presenting a unified front across the city. And as you can see from the last two bullets, we found, or the consultant kind of found a mixed bag, with regard to user fees. I'm happy to say the clerk treasurer's office, is covering their costs. And so, is permitting an inspection. Those two departments, by and large, the fee study said they are charging fees appropriately. There's very little room to increase them. But it was a different story for fire, Parks and Rec, DPW, and BCA. We had put in a plug figure of $1.3 million early on into our budget. That figure came from the fact that these user fees make up about $13 million of the budget. And so as you can see, that's a 10% increase. In discussions with the consultant, although we're still figuring out exactly how much the fees will increase in fire versus parks, we should be able to easily, maybe not particularly easily, we will be able to meet the $1.3 million originally forecast. And you'll see in a later slide, we're estimating the increase in user fees at $1.5 million. We are continuing to strategically use one-time funds. We've spoken before, but for those who may not remember or may be just joining us, the city did receive just over $27 million of ARPA funds from the federal government. We had previously obligated all of those funds, but as there are, many of the projects have finished and did not use all of their money, I like to say, you know, we're going back to those accounts and scraping what's left so that we can really use it all. So in some cases, there's really just $1,000 or $2,000 left. And then in some cases where we obligated a lot of money, there may be a couple of $100,000 left in a particular program that's finished. So that's the $2.3 million on line 1. We are proposing to redirect some ARPA funds, and that is from the project, the Waterworks project that we spoke about down at the waterfront. And also a project at Roosevelt Park in conversations with the Parks and Rec department head. That is a project that we had originally obligated ARPA funds to, but the community is actually not in favor of what we had proposed. The work had not started, and so it was relatively easy to roll that work back. We are proposing in conjunction with our colleagues in CEDO to free up about $300,000 from the Housing Trust Fund. That money can be used to fund some of the commitments that we have made for homelessness under ARPA, and then we can use those ARPA funds for ARPA eligible items. And then we will use some bond money to pay for capital salaries. This was not included in the first draft of the budget because of the sustainability issue. In FY24, we were relying on $1 million worth of capital money to pay capital salaries, and that's not a level that we could sustain. We've gotten that down to 500,000, and this is another area where we don't have a clear policy of exactly which salaries at which percentages are covered by capital. And so while that gets sorted out in FY25, this is a much more reasonable figure for us to work from. In terms of right sizing the budget, I mentioned that we have about 22 or 23 positions that we will be holding vacant for this next year. That equates to about $1.4 million of savings. We have also been working hard, the mayor and department heads, to see where can we right-size some of our programs without making a big impact on the public. This enterprises picking up more eligible costs is largely what we spoke about with being able to, this is dedicating another officer to the airport's budget. And then we do have an ongoing effort to see if offering an early retirement would make financial sense. We're still in very early discussions with our actuary about that, which is why you don't see a number there. Looking at the summary, this is just a slide summarizing all of the things we've just gone through. I want to say kudos to all of the department heads and all of the staff who have really worked tirelessly over these past few weeks to identify funds that we can use to fill this gap. Also, you can see originally we had identified a $13 million gap. We're coming in with solutions over $13 million. And that is because our new mayor would like to be able to have some continued funding or additional funding for community safety. She will probably want to talk about that in a minute. As soon as I get through my what's next slide, which is we will continue through this process, you know, over the next 3 nights. We will review each department's budget. Everyone will continue to ask questions. We'll make some final tweaks. Based on that, we will submit a detailed version of the budget by June 15th. You guys will approve it by June 30th. And some of the other things we're working on, you may notice that there is not much mention of the operational analysis here. That is because we have also received an initial draft of that. And there's a lot of very interesting information in there. It is not quickly actionable for the FY25 budget. And so that should say implement changes in FY26. That's what happens when you're doing this late at night. But that is the intention, is that over FY25, we have some of these discussions because they're much larger issues. It's not this relatively easy things like keeping a position vacant here or there that we're talking about. It's larger structural issues that will take conversation at this level and with our community. Other things that people have brought up that I want to make sure you know are still definitely in consideration. We're continuing to talk about franchise fees and our payments in lieu of taxes to make sure those are equitable and that those fees are borne appropriately across the community. Those are, again, not quick fixes. We will continue to work on them through FY25, and in the FY26 budget, you'll see some movement. That's it for me. Sure.
Exactly 15 minutes. And I'm going to take a minute and a half just to provide
Good.
a little more context. And I really want to start by saying I'm quite proud of our city department heads and the staff. I just really want to echo what the CAO said. I asked about 3 or 4 weeks ago for people to go back to the but to go back to their budgets that I know that they were well into the process of developing, to go deeper and to ask harder questions about what we could possibly do to find $13 million. And that was no small ask. And I really acknowledge how much work has been done by the city in the last 3 weeks or so. And so I'm incredibly proud that we not only found 13 million, but we found close to 14 million. And as Catherine mentioned, I asked strategically to aim a little high because we all know we have an immense amount of community safety needs going on in our community right now. And so it did not feel responsible on my part to send you a budget that frankly didn't have anything in terms of really reflecting, trying to do some more strategic investment into what we need beyond police and fire. And you'll see within this budget, the police and fire departments did grow operationally, and we have some strategic investments, including, and one of the things I wanted to include in this expanded $1 million or so, and we may not even need to use all of that, is, for example, CRT, the community response team. It was not included in the fiscal year 25 budget by fire initially, so I want to make sure we have resources to really meet the critical needs that we're having in our community. Similarly, our library, I don't know if folks have been there recently, is really having an acute set of needs right now, and they have additional community safety related asks that were not in their original budget. So I could, again, not be responsible delivering you a budget without making some more room for us to be strategic on what those additional needs are. We're not ready to give you that list yet because it's literally been 3 weeks and we're trying to get you a closed gap first. We convened about 25 people in this room who work across departments to have maybe one of the first cross-department conversations really around community safety and where we need to start thinking across again departments, and even had Howard Center here in the room to think about what are those strategic small level investments we can make in fiscal year 25 that are immediate and can really help the community feel hopefully in at least some small way an actual change. So those will bring to you on the last night of these marvelous nights of May. That will be some reflection of this about 0.8 or $1 million or so that we might have with additional money to work on. The other couple things I just want to say that are included in this in the assumptions, we gave you a very high level. We'll get more into the details as we work out the sort of sub levels of each of these lines. But as I sat with this, I really wanted to make sure I was presenting a fair solution for how we have to increase revenue. And when I was given the option of increasing the public safety tax by 3 cents, it really felt important to think a little more broadly, because that goes to residential and commercial taxpayers and property taxpayers, and it doesn't reflect the entire community. So that is why I'm presenting you something that's a little more small p progressive, which includes our gross receipts tax going up by 0.5 percentage point. That's for a year. One of the biggest tools that I was anticipating using for fiscal year 25 is not available, that operational efficiency study. There's a lot of really big, bold ideas in there, which I think is a really important roadmap. It will be a roadmap for fiscal year 26. There will be a lot of potential cost savings there, but it takes our ability to have a very important and thoughtful conversation about it. Because there's some big questions there that go across departments that really ask important questions around what can we sustain and what do we sustain and why on city services. And there's no way to do that well in 6 weeks. It's impossible. So that tool isn't really reflected in this because we just couldn't use it in the official copy's not even ready yet for our use until probably late this month or early June. So this felt like a fair solution that gets us on the road towards affordability, gets us on the road to sustainability, and starts the conversation about right sizing the city's budget. And we have a lot more work to do. Last thing I'll just say, because I know I'll be asked this, this does include continuing to grow our police department. So we had a good conversation and the Burlington Police Department brought back this number that's within the assumptions here, because I asked them realistically, how likely is it to hire police officers over the course of the next fiscal year versus putting a number in that was not attainable, because we know the hiring trends for every police department across the state and frankly, probably across the region. It's very hard to find police officers to go into these roles. So this budget assumes 10 additional sworn officers to be hired over the course of the next year. There's still a commitment by my administration to continue to work towards rebuilding the department to a number that helps us have a safe community. But I wanted to make sure to present you a budget that was realistic in terms of hiring goals and not putting a number in there that was requiring us to build a budget that was larger than we could sustain for this current year. And so I'm sure you have questions, and I've already gone over the 15 minutes and I use my powers to the end. So happy to answer questions, and I'll send it.
Actually, I just want to make sure that on the sunsetting of the gross receipts increase not the hotel part, that the timing of that allows us to consider having it go into the next year's budget, though the FY26, or perhaps even more than the 0.5%, since it raises a significant amount of money, and I think it is a much more progressive way dealing with the disposable income, have money to be able to go out to eat and drink. And the last thing, I will send you a list of things that I've got here. But to make sure, I just don't know where the impact fee studies status is. It is something which, if I asked for it 2 years ago. I'm not real happy that it's not here now. And it requires not only a study, but then changes in the ordinance. But I do think that it is possible that we can raise for capital projects, significant monies that will go to in large part help us with transportation options, transportation demand management. And we are not doing that. And at the very least, it should be on the same line as the franchise fee point. But I actually think that that should be here. Frustrated is an understatement for that.
I'll just answer quickly about the impact fees. I have not been involved in that study, but I will send a quick email to Megan Tuttle. And I believe it is very close to being finished, so let's see if we can get that
And
answer.
those are, significant funds. We're looking at an expansion of development in the South End. And they go directly to the things that their impact, so they go to libraries, they go to bike, they go to hopefully things related more than just a traffic light for cars, but for bus stops, all capital related to that. We could be buying electric buses and smaller ones if we had the funds. It's insane that we are 30 years out from the last. So anyway.
Thank you, Counselor. And to your first question, I am planning, now that I know what I know about the budget process, we're starting much earlier, so I hope to have a much better, sorry staff, but we're gonna start way earlier to have a real sense of where we are, especially with some of these conversations on right-sizing the budget to know what we might be looking at. I literally want to start in July. That's how we're here.
So that it will be critical, and I'll just end with this, they're critical that the language that goes to increase, the passage of the budget does not automatically do it, you have to then pass an ordinance change, that ordinance change would have the sunsetting in it, and so the language in it, we have to be sure that we're not hamstringing our ability to use it in the next year. We have hamstrung ourselves on things like the recycling tax, where we passed budgets, but we didn't pass the ordinance. How to fix that a long time ago.
Duly noted, thank you. Yep. Other questions from Councilor Carpenter?
This is sort of more big picture, but I don't know if CEO can answer this. Going into this, we had pretty firmly said we can get $3 million out of the operation study for FY25. What changed that made us not do that? Or think we can't get it sooner than the end of FY25?
Because I think we envisioned that we would get from the operational study short-term recommendations and long-term recommendations. And that the short-term recommendations would help us get to the 3 million, and it would identify things like vacancy savings. And what we are getting is a focus on the long term and less on the short term. And so you can see in our presentation, we have attempted under the right sizing to reach that $3 million. And so we've gotten to 2.5. And that is with the help of everyone in the administration, but timing wise did not allow for us. The operational assessment has only been seen by me and the mayor and maybe 1 or 2 other people because it's still very much in draft form. So I don't know if ultimately we will still be able to realize that level of savings or not. But I do know that if we are not going to see a final draft until the beginning of June, we can't build our budget on it. Does that help?
Yes, and this is sort of question number 2, understanding you can't build your budget on it. But I think one thing I'm concerned about is the amount of one-time money, which is $3 million more than we had told the taxpayers we were gonna do. I would hope, and I'm just sort of throwing this out, is we could see a sub-budget, which is to say, how can we more quickly implement some of those changes and reduce the use of one-time money. So that it's not a full fiscal year's worth of that extra 3 million that we're plugging. And, you know, is there some sort of metric quarterly, could you come to us and say, here's a recommendation to reduce a budget line item or budget program, I'm presuming, and I'm presuming it's a lot of people, so that we can really tackle that one-time money, because I'm just very concerned about that, and we've just kicked the can down to 26, which would be equally more unacceptable.
I completely agree, and also I just want to note that we have, for fiscal year 26 one, we still have a dependency on one-time funds. It's smaller than what we were looking at when we started this process for fiscal year 25. And that is the big work ahead. The vacancies, just to clarify, the vacancy savings and what we propose is really just sort of luck of the draw, this moment in time of vacancies we could hold open for fiscal year 25 before we're able to actually do, in my mind, a fair assessment on what programs should we be continuing to operate, what positions do we really, can we continue to sustain? This is just a moment in trying to really shore up this and close this gap at this moment. And that's the work that I want to really start at the end of the summer.
And how will you be sharing that with us? Or
The work of the operational study and whatnot. I've been very committed to transparency, so I really want to use updates regularly at the Board of Finance primarily, and we can figure out if there's a quarterly update to the council at large. But these are big suggestions in this study, and that's again why I really didn't want to give anyone, it would just not be good process to implement even one of the, I mean, legitimate but big ideas that were in this draft of this operational efficiency study. So and some of it is not even probably within a year. I think it really is a roadmap for the next 2 to 3 years for the city about what kind of government do we want, how are we providing services now. I mean, there's even larger questions, I'm sure, related to around housing and the unhoused, and what is Burlington's role to be serving and holding all these gaps when the state itself is not coming to the table. So it's that level conversation and really figuring out what parts are we consciously wanting to do and needing to do versus what do we have to let go. Thanks. Other questions?
Thanks. So I am interested in hearing about the general unassigned balance that is below the 10% recommended target, right? I think it's like 8% right now. So are we with what we're seeing, the numbers we're seeing here, are we expecting to be able to grow that just a little bit? Are we expecting to be able to get up to the 10, because it seems like with the use of one-time funds, with cost of living adjustments, with potentially increasing debt servicing costs, new expenses, it seems like this would be good to come out, quite a bit ahead here, get the unassigned balance up to a level where we could potentially even drop from it. I understand there's 10 to 15% of the budget is the recommended range.
So these are great questions. Our policy is that the unassigned fund balance is between 5 and 15. So we are well within that. Our target is 10%. And we are just over 8%. It would be a decision of this body and the mayor for how you would want to proceed in terms of, do you want to budget so that we are budgeting more revenues than we are expenses, in which case then at the end of the year, we could put that extra revenue into the unassigned fund balance? Or would you like to fund new initiatives? Would you like to try and find so much more revenue that we can fund new initiatives and put some money away? And how do we do that? So, I guess at this point, that's still an open question. We're coming to you saying, at this point, we have potentially identified more revenue than we need for the expenses. And I think that is where you could give us direction of how you would like us to budget that.
Okay, thanks. And then unrelated question, the Moran plant, there was some money allocated for project there, I think it was like $600,000, it was in one of the lines here. I thought I heard Director Pine though say that only $150,000 of that money had been reallocated away from the brand plan project. Is it the full 600 that's gone, or is it?
It was all of the money that had not yet been obligated, and it is more than 150,000, except it is 297,000 that had not yet been committed to that. So that is not yet committed to the Moran plant in a contract, and so that's what will be rolling back to the general.
And I just had another question about debt servicing costs. I think they're increasing from like 7 to 8 million or so. And I'm wondering, just in terms of looking forward, are we expecting to take on new significant debts? Like, how does the high school play in here? Like, where do we think we'll be in terms of debt servicing? Like, there are more predictable, cost of living adjustments. Just wondering, like, in terms of on the debt side of things, like, where do we see that number in the next couple of years?
I would be happy to provide you a projection that is fairly knowable at this point, given our debt policy. There is no room to take on new debt, so I could prepare that for you.
Okay, thank you, Counselor. Counselor Shannon?
Hi, hi, thanks. I would like to hear more about the right sizing. To me, the term would indicate some things will get bigger, some things will get smaller. If that's not the case, it's really just cuts. And as it seems to be producing savings, very significant savings by cutting programs, I'd like to know what they are. And also you indicated that this budget funds all existing staff. And I don't understand where the savings comes from if you're cutting programs without cutting staff.
Start, and then Catherine, if you can. So I'm on the slide that says right sizing budget, and so on that slide, Counselor, the vacancy savings are what I was mentioning before. They're in this moment when I asked department heads to please identify any position that's vacant right now that they could hold open and not hire, so we could save money for fiscal year 25. As Catherine mentioned before, it's hovering between 22 and 23 or so across departments. It's literally 1 here, 2 there for the most part. And we can get you a full list of what those departments are in those positions right now. But that's what the 1.4 million is on that slide. And my intention, as I said before, is for that to be temporary for this year while we figure out with the use of the operational efficiency study, how can we be merging programs? How can we be looking at things that could be done more efficiently? How do we ask these bigger questions, or what are those services again that we should even be providing as a city? Because we've been living on a lot of one-time funds and it's not sustainable. And so that's the work ahead though for fiscal year 26. The various programs, the 0.7 million, we also asked department heads, I asked department heads to try now to identify programs that we could perhaps start to roll back because they're not the most critical thing to be offering from that department. That was a harder ask for folks to answer. Again, they've had this question for 3 weeks. I'm trying to remember roughly what we've included was a small amount of savings we could get from the early learning initiative. That's my own timer going off on me. See, I time myself as well. And so it was about $250,000 that we, because of, and for that one in particular, just remember that the state, while that program has been operating, passed historic legislation that started to backfill what ELI was actually starting to do since 2018, which was subsidizing on the local level spots in early education for families, and then helping to get childcare centers started. That was a money that we worked with business and workforce development for that $250,000 or so, where we're trying not to duplicate what the state's starting to do and be strategic about it. So it's a little bit of a sweeping, if you will, within that program. About $100,000 of savings from BCA and some of their arts programming. And then we were able to, because we, with the council's support, moved the bonuses, the retention bonuses for fire, before the end of this fiscal year, we were able to expend about $200,000 in this fiscal year and did not have to use that for next fiscal year. So that all goes into, I can't total that very quickly, but I believe that's the 0.7 million, she's saying yes.
And there's
Portion.
there's a few other, Counselor Shannon, that are so small, it's like 25,000 here, 50,000 there, and that's why we kind of rolled it up into this various programs, but it's, you know, Scott Barker cut something from his IT budget, due to efficiencies. HR cut something small over here, rather than detail every single one of those, we've rolled it up, but the mayor has gotten the large expenses there.
And then just very briefly on this slide, just to finish, the enterprises funds that picked up a little bit more were small shifts here and there. For example, the water division took the street sweeping operation into their budget, that's $100,000 or so. And this reflects, I believe, the airport taking or paying for a few more officers to get up to the 7 FTEs fully. We have to make sure we offer those officers, of course, because they're paying for them through the airport. But that's the kind of stuff we were trying to creatively ask, where can enterprise funds be fairly and rightly offering a little bit more to the general fund.
So none of the cuts to programs then, because it really may be more of a shift in how things are funded in many cases, rather than cutting a program, or as you mentioned with the early learning initiative, that's cutting a program where there's something else filling in behind it as an alternative. So none of these things actually involve laying people off.
Correct, and maybe it's the title, maybe this should be called right sizing, that's probably a fiscal year 26 title that we're gonna need to use, I would like us to use. But this, you're right, Counselor, this is more shifting things around in ways that either other services or programs can pick up and on the state level, or in our local case, enterprise funds could be helping in another way.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I just want to start by saying I share Councilor Carpenter's concerns about the size of the amount of one-time money that we're including in this budget. I think we're at $4.5 million last year, we're at 3.7, but hoping that it was something significantly less this year. Understand the pressures that we have. I also want to say that I was hopeful that we would have the operational analysis and be able to incorporate it this year. But I realize it's not ready. I realize that some of the ideas will take longer to implement, but I'll suggest that we don't wait till fiscal 26. If there's good things in that study, that we start implementing them as soon as possible, because we're just gonna have the same kind of challenges next year if we wait till fiscal 26. It might be easier to do that work beforehand, or at least start it. I have concerns about the replacement of voter-approved authorization for the public safety, the extra 1 cent on public safety tax, with a new tax on gross receipts. They raised approximately the same amount of money, it seems, but I don't know if this has been run through the business community. We have a business community, people say that we're trying to make it more equitable and spread the taxation pain around, but we have businesses that are really struggling and are on life support right now. And we need to do better by them and making them less competitive with businesses in neighboring communities. I don't think does that. That said, I'd like to hear what the business community thinks about this, and how much, I haven't done the calculation, but I don't know how much it means on a meal. How much extra is it, and would it make someone go get a meal at a South Burlington restaurant rather than a Burlington restaurant? I don't know, but I do have concerns about that. And the last thing is maybe a smaller one, and it's something I heard in it's on the right sizing budget slide, and it's the 400,000. I think I heard CAO Shad say that was for an extra officer out of Burlington International. at Burlington, at the airport, the foreign.
There are other costs there too, like the water.
But I would suggest to us that we should not be sending any additional officers out to the airport. We have 6 out there now. I think we have to cover the TSA checkpoints when they're open. And we should send as few officers to the airport as we can. We need them here in the city working. So I would challenge any assertion that we need to send it out there. They've been able to, under the conditions that we have, make do for over a couple of years, I think, now, with 6 officers. So if that's possible, I understand that it changes this number, but I think we should look at that. And I guess that's all I have for tonight. Thank you.
Councilor Barlow? Any other comments or questions? Councilor Travers?
Yeah. Thank you very much for all the work that has gone into this. Just a couple questions. One is to follow up on what the Councilor Barlow just made, which is any increase to the gross receipts tax is going to require action by the council. And curious to hear your thoughts on in building this budget, what the timeline on that would have to be in order for it to work with what you're discussing. I guess the follow-up question to that then would be between now and whenever the council needs to take action to increase the gross receipts tax, what plan there would be to involve our business community in that discussion.
Well, I will have the CEO talk about the timeline part, having not been part of that process before, about just making sure the timing all lines up to align with the fiscal year. But in terms of the business community, as I said before, we worked on this for 3 weeks. You're trying to look, I really was trying to do this in the fairest way possible. So, you know, for me, part of affordability is also the folks who live here, being able to not shoulder the entire amount of revenue that we need to raise in order to balance this budget. And so now the next step is to start engaging the folks impacted, which includes the business community, to really talk about what does half a percentage really look like on an average meal. But also, that's why I want to propose a sunset to really talk about this is to get us into a year where we're really gonna need to start looking at our budget with a much more holistic view, with a process that makes sense, in partnership with the council and the public, about what kind of city government can we sustain. And in the time being, we need a budget that we can actually operate with. So that's the next step of work, is trying to really engage folks impacted, which include, you know, of course, the residents as well, because they already have 3 different taxes that are impacted with how we have to raise revenue. The 2 trigger taxes that are just required by charter on their bill, and then the 2 cents on the public safety tax. And then, of course, we have 2 other things that are on most people's bills, which would be the electric bill and the water bill. And so I am mindful at the end of the day what their bill looks like, as much as I'm also mindful of what our consumption tax is, which is gross receipts tax, and really trying to balance it out. So to be continued.
Yeah, and then just, I mean, is the increase in the gross receipts tax is something that the council would have to take action on before July 1?
That would be my hope, so that it could start on July 1, but I guess I don't know the answer to, could it be taken up after July 1? But my plan was with the hotel tax to have it taken up before or simultaneously to the budget.
Okay. And then just a somewhat related question. I know that the city has made some commitments in the last couple of years to phase out business personal property tax. Does this involve a continuation of that, or are you getting pause on that phase out process? What's the status of that?
No, we did, in all transparency, look at that. That involves a charter change, and so we are leaving that as it is. That continues through FY25, and in FY26, it sunsets.
Okay. Just a couple other follow-up questions. To the extent we are keeping all currently filled positions, to confirm, is that all current positions regardless of their funding source, regardless of the funding sources outside of the city?
For fiscal year 25, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. And then in terms of the tax increase row that's on the slide, which includes retirement and debt service, are all of those tax increases from dedicated taxes that from your perspective are not going to require voter approval? Or are there any parts of that that you anticipate that we would have to go to voters to ask for a general fund increase?
No. We do not need to ask for a general fund increase.
Okay. So just as we continue, I'm sure this will be the plan, but I do think that it would be helpful for in each of these rows to just expand them out a bit more. You know, you talk about right sizing, what exactly are we talking about? As we talk about vacancies, I think from my perspective, it would be helpful to have a list of how many vacancies we currently have right now, and then highlighting those vacancies that we are including in the plan here. Exactly which fees are we talking about when we're discussing increasing fees, exactly which costs are being picked up by enterprises. It sounds like you have some of the information, which is great, but to the extent we're able to circulate that sooner rather than later, that would be helpful. And I guess just my last question here is, and maybe you touched on it, and I'm sorry if I missed it, but I know one of the slides talks about sort of early retirement, TBD. Is that something that you anticipate your office will be able to share some additional details on as we move forward, or is that sort of an opinion to see if we can continue to work on that as we move into the fiscal year?
I suspect that we will not have information from our actuaries. We're not gonna have it till the end of May. And so this is probably something that we would continue to work on with you into FY25. This is just signaling that it is something that we are working on and will continue to talk to you about.
Okay. Thanks.
No problem. It is 8 o'clock. Are there any other questions on this presentation? Lucky us, we have one more thing to review. Right, then I'm gonna call it. This is our first pass, and my office is open for questions anytime, as is I'm sure the CAO, just jumps over.
Yes.
I know you are very good at answering questions. Okay. So with that, let's move on to our last agenda item of the night, which is the non-department budget. Did I say that correctly? I don't have my
Yes,
agenda.
but we missed a question from Counselor Grant, so.
I am sorry, Councilor Grant, I'm
That's okay.
sorry.
She was hiding here.
Are you still there, Councilor Grant?
She's gonna rejoin as a panelist, so just give us one quick second.
Okay.
Okay, here I am.
Hey, you get the last question. Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. I was like at work and then I was driving back to Burlington. So I thank you to Catherine for trying several times to promote me earlier. So thanks to my fellow counselors for all their questions because they pretty much covered what I was interested in. I just wanted to make one request because previously when we started discussing the increase of certain taxes like the hotel tax and the rooms and meals tax, we had looked at other towns and what neighboring states were doing. It would be great to include that in the summary of the budget because I believe our hotel tax, even with the increase, is still very competitive to what neighboring states are doing. And I do think it's worth asking the question like where we fall with rooms and meals with regards to other towns, although I have to say I think we have the best restaurants, but you know. I would also, I'm gonna dip into the BPOA contract because there was an issue previously that the number of officers was also contracted, but I think it was removed from the current contract because it came up as a CNA recommendation where they said, yes, we had to work with the airport and the FAA requirements, but there was no reason to actually put in the contract that there must be a specific number at the airport. So it'd be, I'm kind of curious to go back and look at that to verify that that was taken out. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. All right, with that, now we will go to the non-departmental budget we've all been waiting for. It's the most exciting one.
Yeah, in case someone is like, what is the non-departmental budget? Why would I even care about that? It is actually our largest budget. It just has a bad name. Okay, yes. Share. Okay, and I think we can do this pretty quickly. Okay, the big picture. This non-departmental budget is where we recognize a lot of our big revenues. Property taxes, pilots, fee for service, local option taxes, gross receipts, franchise fees, all the big hitters. The expenses include our debt service payments, a lot of the money that we collect in taxes but is dedicated, so think penny for parks, library tax, street capital. And then charges that are shared among the city, like our internet costs and the electricity costs for this building. You can see in this chart how the both revenues and expenses have grown between last year and this year. A little bit more on the revenues and how they have changed. We've got some information on the property taxes. I hope the mayor appreciates my dad joke here, or maybe my mom joke. My pilot picture here, payment in lieu of taxes.
I love that it's a woman pilot.
Oh yeah, I searched for the woman
right,
pilot,
right.
yeah,
A woman of color pilot, actually.
yes, thank you for.
Well done, yeah.
There's always a lot of questions around pilots. These are governed by charter, and that states that we will receive payments from BED and our friends at Water equal to what we would receive in taxes if they were private utilities. We also receive a pilot from the state for the buildings that it owns. Then fee for services, or as I like to say, pilot adjacent, because those serve the same kind of purpose as pilots, but those are with the organizations, you know, UVM, UVMMC, Champlain College. Some of our other revenues, franchise fees, and BED and water are the main payers there. As I mentioned, we are working with our friends in the city attorney's office about possible changes. The local option tax, this is a 1% sales tax on goods sold in Burlington. It is destination based, so you cannot evade it by ordering things online. We will hunt you down, and if it is shipped to Burlington, we will get our 1%. But it is collected by the state and we get reimbursed quarterly. So an interesting thing here is that we don't have a lot of data or any data about where the 1% is coming from. One day each quarter, a large wire comes into my office to the tune of like $740,000 or something, maybe $800,000. And that is our local option tax. And we are thankful for it, but it would be helpful to kind of know where it came from. And that is different than the gross receipts, which we've been talking about, and that current rate is 2%. That's collected by people in the clerk treasurer's office, and while we can't share that information because you'd be able to see exactly how much any of the businesses here were making, that's information that we at least have, and that can be useful internally. Revenues, just noting here, we have talked about trying to make this a sustainable budget. And so I do want to recognize we don't have any miscellaneous revenue, miscellaneous grants, or unassigned fund balance, which we had in FY24 in this budget, totaling almost $2 million. That revenue, especially the miscellaneous, was not really achievable. And as we've talked about the unassigned fund balance, we don't have money that we want to take from there. So that is a noteworthy achievement. In terms of expenses, we've talked about what those were. Here are some numbers to go along with them. By far, the biggest expense are those interfund transfers. the tax money that comes in kind of one hand, and some of it goes out the other hand to pay for these dedicated items. Debt service, and then the shared costs that we talked about. Okay, now, if everyone is awake, some of you may remember the big five represent 70% of all of the city's general fund revenue. We've talked about four of the big five: property taxes, pilots, fee for service, and franchise fees. Four of them are in this non-departmental budget, which is what is the fifth category that makes up the big five? It is not here, but we have talked about it tonight.
Well, that gross receipts tax, which we've had for so long, that I can't believe it, that took the price of that was able to.
Good guess,
Thank
but
you.
there's something bigger than gross receipts. It is $13 million. We are going to increase it by 1.3 to 1.5 million next year.
Parking?
Anyone? User fees.
Oh, fuck.
Yes, user fees are our last category. But it is interesting to note that of the big five, four of them are in non-departmental. And then that fifth one, you know, the reason people don't associate 13 million is because it's like, there's some in fire, there's some in parks, there's some in everywhere almost. And that's it. This is the shortest presentation you're gonna get because it's pretty straightforward. That said, I'm still happy to take any questions you have.
All right, for those of us who are still here, what question?
Yeah, you really held in. Good job.
All right, Counselor Shannon, kick us off.
My question is really simple. The slide deck that I saw on Civic Clerk didn't include the last slides that you showed. Is that a problem? Was it updated to include those, or are they actually not there?
Well, I'm looking at.
If it's just me, tell me that so I don't waste your time.
I think it's just you, Counselor Shannon.
Okay.
Refresh.
Yeah, hit refresh because I'm looking at Counselor Broderick's computer and it looks okay.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions, comments?
I've got one.
Oh, hold on, Counselor Grant, Counselor Broderick, and then Counselor Grant.
Thank you.
A point of information for me. So for the pilots and the fee for services, I know you said that the pilots were governed by charter. Is that the same for fee for service? Like if you wanted to like ask one of the fee for service recipients or whatever, more money from them for whatever reason, there may be, would that have to go through the charter and through the state?
No, those are agreements that it is my understanding are made between the city, including the city council, and so we do have leeway over that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Counselor Grant?
Hi, so kind of similar question specifically about the pilot funds. I have a lot of bitterness towards pilot funds. So I would really like to understand better exactly how they're negotiated and I'm sorry, was it just said that they're governed by the charter?
Yes, so we put them all into one category, but really they're two. And the pilots specifically are only paid by BED, water, wastewater, stormwater, and the state of Vermont. And that is governed by charter. And so would have to be changed by charter. The charter says we receive in payment equal to what we would receive in taxes if they were private utilities. One thing to note is it does say we could receive cash or in-kind services. We always take the cash. We don't give them another option because we need the cash. Then in the fee for services category, that is where we have more leeway, Counselor Grant. That is where we have all the other organizations who pay us something like UVM, the medical center, Champlain College, Burlington Housing Authority and others.
Okay, so we have separate agreements with those organizations. And these agreements last a certain amount of time? Like, are they contracts?
I didn't hear your last word, I'm sorry, are they what?
Are they contracts?
I can't say that I've actually seen every single one of them, but they are letters of agreement, I can say, for both UVM and Champlain, and I don't know if I've seen every single other one of them. I'm not sure I would state it as a contract.
It's important to point out that all those institutions are statutorily exempt.
Yes.
So this is a negotiated agreement because we as a city have no statutory authority to tax them. So and we have tried another methodology.
So thank you, Councilor Carpenter. What I would like to see us to work on for FY26, I would like to see, and it is something I've asked about before, but just kind of got lost among everything else going on. I would really like to have a comprehensive overview of these agreements. I would like to know, I have seen a document that had them all listed, and I was just, it's amazing the amount of land in the city that is not taxed. So I'd be very, do we know the percentage of the top of your head? Do you know the percentage of land in the city that's not taxed?
It is approximately 60% that is not taxed.
Jesus Christ. So that obviously is a huge burden on our residents who are property taxpayers and our businesses that are property taxpayers. And we're offering all these services. So when I think about UVM and Champlain and all the growth that they've had over the last several years, they're using more city services, right? So I would like to know comprehensively for all of these lands that are paying these fees in lieu of the fact that we can't charge them property taxes. I'd like to know, I'd like to see each agreement. I would like to know when the agreements were last signed and what is the length of term of agreements. And I'd like to see what our options are for renegotiating some of these, especially given how some of these organizations have grown and their continued reliance on city services. Are we in a place where I would have to think with some of these, and I have to go back and look at what was sent. I just really felt that given the size and given some of the changes with some of these businesses and nonprofits and their additional burden on the city, that this is something that we really need to look at. So I would just like to really strongly recommend that we are doing that. And especially if we can't say for sure when's the last time we did in fact renew that agreement with UVM or with Champlain or with the hospital, just to make, I just feel that there's a lot of money. And when you're talking about like over 60% of the land is exempt from property taxes, that's just kind of stunning to me. But thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other questions?
I have a question about franchise fees. There was, I think, an item that was maybe gonna be on the agenda for today about franchise fees, just related to I think on gas. I don't quite understand like why they would be very different for different utilities, like for instance, on gas versus like DED. Do you have any insight there?
I think that might be more appropriate for us to talk about when we get to Vermont gas. generally, we have a statute and it is a percentage. But there is a whole backstory of how certain agreements were made in the before times, in the 90s when this first started, which is part of the discussion around VGS in particular.
Any other questions? Counselor Travers?
Just briefly, perhaps, this is just around getting my head sort of further around still the concept of the gross receipts tax versus the local option tax that's available to municipalities around the state. You know, my understanding is that Burlington, as compared to, as I understand, pretty much every other municipality in the state is uniquely positioned in that our charter does allow us to charge these gross receipts tax, which is why we have not levied the local option tax on a number of these other items like other communities have. My question though is whether or not by levying gross receipts tax as compared to the local option tax that is permitted by the state, is there anything that we're missing out on? And in particular, I'm focused on the sale of alcohol in Burlington. So I think our gross receipts tax only applies to alcohol that is purchased in a bar ready for consumption on site. I believe the state's local option tax extends to, maybe I'm wrong about this, but would extend to alcohol that's sold in a liquor store or a grocery store or what have you. And I'm curious whether or not surrounding municipalities that have decided to levy their alcohol local option tax are realizing revenues that Burlington is not outside of the restaurant bar industry. Just I don't know how much that would amount to, but wondering if it's another opportunity. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, totally. And I'm trying to remember what requires a charter change or not. My brain is too tired. But
I don't think so. I'm just
local options require a charter change.
I don't think so. I don't think so. No.
Okay.
I think that's the only area that there's no overlap between our gross receipts tax and the local option tax. I guess that would be question one, is whether there is state statute distinguishes alcohol sold in like liquor store or grocery store. And then question two would be, are there any revenues that we realize there? I'm pretty sure every community surrounding Burlington does levy the local option tax on alcohol.
Anything else?
Oh, sorry, quick question about the gross receipts tax. I think I had heard that there might be some exemptions for like up to a certain dollar threshold or certain categories of items. Perhaps including like shoes. I'm not sure if I'm getting my thing given different
Local
tax.
option tax,
Okay, right.
yes.
Yeah, just something I'll have to look into.
Yep.
Part of it better sense.
There's a list of each of the things, and it's more curious than anything else. What's covered in.
Sure that exists.
Oh, yes, that's, I have this all bookmarked, I'll just send it your way.
Okay, anything else? Online or in the room?
It's very dated, right?
Yeah.
How much more could we be getting out of all the showmen, circuses, menageries? Right, so.
Somebody say that,
Never
it is right
know.
here.
Well, and on the local option, you know, there are things that over which we don't have control, like the shoes and the clothing and things like that. But it will be interesting for everyone to look at.
Okay, I feel our time is coming to a close. I think if you have any other thoughts or questions, certainly reach out. This is the first of several nights of budget information. Our next one is Wednesday. It's a long list and will be warned as of the end of today of what departments will be covering on Wednesday. Staring at it, so come back for more on Wednesday. And with that, I'm going to adjourn this meeting. Thank you very much at 8:22 p.m.